the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're going to start tonight with announcements, and I'll start on my right with Mr. Quinn. Any announcements for this evening?
None this evening, Mayor.
And Ms. Howard, any announcements? Mr. Lieberman?
No, I just want to state that on, I believe it was last Monday, Martin Luther King's Day, we had a celebration at the First Baptist Church, and it involved several places of faith, and we had 172 people in attendance, and Reverend Bob Moore, Peace Action Group, spoke. And I just want to say that it was such a fulfilling experience to see a lot of members from Princeton, a lot of members from different places come together at a peaceful time. And I was with Mr. Andrew Zwicker, Assemblyman Zwicker, this week, and he mentioned that that was one of the most inspiring times that he's had since he's been in office. And I'm thinking that more and more Princeton community shouldn't wait until MLK Day to get together, and that we should do these things maybe quarterly or even, monthly. But it was just such a rewarding time to be together. And when you're together as in that kind of environment, when things happen, they're not as bad things happen, they're not as bad because you develop trust among your fellow community members. So I just wanted to point that out today because it was such a meaningful event. Thank you.
Thanks, Lance. Ms. Krummeller?
I just want to say that my mother texted me, and it's her birthday today, but the reason she texted me is that she can't see us. So happy birthday, Mom.
Are we back on?
I think you just said
Okay, good. All right. It's my daughter's birthday, too, so I'm sure she's not watching, but just to know I'm embarrassing her in absentia is good. Mr. Cohen?
I don't know.
Ms. Tita, any announcements? Ms.
Just one
Fargo,
quick
sorry.
one. I do have a list of announcements for the rec department, but I've submitted them to the clerk for them to go into the minutes. However, I do want to just announce that's coming up. The rec department is going to be hiring for seasonal employment beginning on February 1st, and they will be accepting applications for the positions of seasonal maintenance, custodial, camp counselors, sport camp counselors, lifeguards, customer service staff, and also a handful of other program-related positions. The applications will be available on the rec department's website, princetonrecreation.com, and also hard copies of the applications will be available in the rec department offices.
Terrific. Thank you. Do you want to announce that now or when we get to parking? You can announce it now and then again.
I don't know if people are staying. Just if you are buying smart cards for parking, we want you to know that we are phasing out the smart cards probably by next September, but we just want to give people plenty of notice. If you're accumulating money on your cards, you might want to spend it and plan accordingly, because after we phase them out, we can't give a refund.
Thank you. I have two quick announcements. The first is this Friday, January 26th, from 8:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. I'll be having my monthly Meet the Mayor hours, and you can come even if you know me already. It's just with whatever concerns or suggestions you have, and I'll be at the Princeton Public Library in the lobby, and that's this Friday from 8:30 to 10 a.m. And my second announcement is that our second council meeting in February, so the February 26th council meeting, we're going to be meeting, this might be news to my colleagues, but we're going to be meeting in Monument Hall, so in the Old Borough Building. And as part of that meeting, we're going to be having a roundtable discussion with President Eisgruber from Princeton University. And just the room there, it makes it easier to have that conversation. It'll be a regular meeting that starts at 7, and everybody is invited. And that is going to be again on Monday, February 26th. Are there any staff announcements? Nope. Okay, then we will move on to our award of recognition tonight. And this is our first award that we're handing out in 2018. And every month, the council likes to recognize someone in the community that helps to make Princeton the special place that we are. And we're really lucky to have so many individuals and nonprofits and businesses that go the extra mile to make this a special place. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Cromiller to give out tonight's award.
So I'm happy to be recognizing SAVE, Friends of Homeless Animals, tonight. SAVE has been part of our community since 1941, providing an invaluable service in taking care of our furry friends. SAVE is a nonprofit animal shelter dedicated to protecting the health and welfare of companion animals in our area. It's now located outside of Princeton in Skillman, but it operates a limited admission animal shelter and works with our animal control officer to help take care of our animal issues. But the 6 core programs of SAVE are to rescue, shelter, health, and welfare, and spay and neuter, adoption, and humane education. SAVE focuses on the rehabilitation and successful placement of treatable and adoptable animals. Besides providing care for homeless pets and finding homes for them, SAVE has been there for us in emergencies. For instance, most recently there was a pet displaced in the Griggs Farm fire, and SAVE was there to help. Tonight we have with us Heather Achenbach, the executive director. Heather has been with SAVE since June of last year, but also here are John Sayer, a longtime trustee, Robbie Ellsworth, a trustee, and Pam Murdoch, board president. So Heather, would you like to say a few words?
Oh, we just have heard from somebody trying to watch us on TV that there's still no picture. So can we let them know? Is there sound and no picture?
The sound was barely there.
Okay. Is he working on it? Okay. Okay. Do you have your own recording so that we're, okay. Okay, good. Okay, so now we'll move on, and you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, the SAVE folks, but you're also, we understand if you don't want to stay for the rest too. Now, yeah, thank you so much. So now we'll move on to comments from the public for items that are not already on the agenda. And I'm going to start with the folks who've signed up ahead of time, and then we'll open it up to anybody else. So the first person is Bootseam.
Good evening, Boot Seam. I live at 15 Newland Road in Princeton. And the issue that we're here to discuss tonight is what does the town of Princeton do when an institution or an individual repeatedly fails to comply with conditions placed upon it by the planning board? So some of you serve on the planning board as well, so you may be familiar with the situation. Others may not, so let me briefly bring everybody up to speed. In June 2016, the Institute for Advanced Study came before the planning board seeking approval for its kitchen expansion project. The planning board noted the ongoing concern of the neighbors regarding construction and delivery traffic on Olga Lane, a small residential street aptly named Lane. But the planning board granted the approval with conditions. These conditions stated that the Institute is to use Maxwell, not Olga Lane, for all construction and delivery traffic. The exception was for tractor trailers that are too large to turn onto Maxwell, and these trucks could use Olden, but only after notice was given to the Princeton Police Department, the Dennis
I want to thank you for this and for the pictures. I just, the 3 minutes is up, and we just have a full room tonight, so I want to respond, and I know we have Jack West here too, who might be able to add to this. So I think I sent you some of this material already, but the Institute has provided the town with the information that they send out to their contractors, and they have fined some of the violators.
That's not the condition says no trucks, it doesn't say notify people, it doesn't say be nice to people, it doesn't say ignore the neighbors, it says no trucks on Old Lane.
Okay, so I don't,
That's the condition. It's a,
well, I think part of, yeah, I think part of the conditions also were that they had to provide written notification to,
probably got 20 conditions. One of them
right.
says they will not have any construction or delivery traffic on Old Lane, period, end of discussion. Chris Carr's testimony. And that is in the conditions. That's in page 3 of the presentation, highlighted in yellow.
Okay.
You know, I can wrap this up really quickly.
Okay, well, I just want to make,
Lauren can take over the next 3 minutes, or I can use her time if you like.
we can't have people share time, so actually, if, Lauren, you want to speak, and then we'll make sure we respond as best we can.
She's next in line, I believe.
Okay, yep, perfect. You need to get right up close to it. Thank you. Mr. West, did you want to? comment on what's
Just
been
what
done?
I'd like to do is discuss this with the planning board attorney as to the actual condition in the resolution, that is, whether it's an absolute no trucks, especially delivery trucks. There's been a lot of testimony about construction traffic. I know in their contracts, they have clauses. They've issued numerous fines to the contractor doing the dining hall. They've actually fired contractors. So they are doing what they can do. Obviously, for the residents, that's, with 90 trucks over the last month or whatever the time period was, doesn't appear to be appropriate. But I'd like to talk to Alan Porter as far as the wording of the actual condition, because I'm not sure that it's an absolute no trucks. It is a public road. The issue of enforcement, it's actually not a police issue because it is a public road. They're not breaking any traffic laws. The issue would be whether it's a violation of the site plan approval, where the project could be shut down.
Okay, that would be terrific, thank you. And then I think you have the Seams's contact information, and I think probably council would appreciate a report on whatever the findings are at our next meeting.
Yep, no
Okay,
problem.
terrific, thank you. Thank you. Okay, is there anybody else who'd like to comment on anything that's not already on the agenda? I invite you to come up to the microphone. And just a reminder that we ask that you try to keep your comments to 3 minutes.
3 minutes, it'll only be 3 minutes. I'm Leonard Burlick. I also live in the Springdale neighborhood. So I'd just like to make one more comment in relation to the previous speakers. And that is that, that neighborhood, we live between two very powerful institutions. The Institute, and I'm a friend of the Institute. I think it's a great institution, and Princeton University. And we really rely on the town council to protect the citizens that live in that neighborhood from things that don't obey the law, as we understand it. And this is a case where the commitment was made not to have traffic on Olden for lots of good reasons. There are a lot of school children in the neighborhood, et cetera, and it changes the whole neighborhood, the nature of the neighborhood. So I hope the town council will accept their responsibility here to take the appropriate action to stop this violation of the law that the city of Princeton itself has taken. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak to something that's not already on the agenda? Yeah, please come up to the microphone.
I'd like to propose an ordinance, if that's okay.
You have to state your name, please.
Elizabeth Forey. I'm proposing an ordinance that pet cats that are allowed outdoors should be required to wear a collar with a bell, similarly to how dogs have to be on leashes for the safety of wildlife and themselves. This is because feral and outdoor cats kill 4 billion birds every year and 22.3 billion small mammals in the U.S. alone, according to the impact of free-ranging domestic cats on wildlife of the United States, which is published on the journal Nature. And because of this, 1/3 of all species of birds in America are endangered. And actually, cats have caused 14% of bird, mammal, and reptile extinctions. And my own research has actually found that cats kill on average 1.22 animals per 2 weeks per cat. And then this decreased by 79% when the cats had a collar with a bell, to only 0.25 animals per 2 weeks per cat. And leash laws have been proposed in Kenai, Alaska, leash laws for cats have been proposed in Kenai, Alaska, St. Louis, Missouri, Englewood, Colorado, Dallas, Texas, Henderson, Nevada, and several other towns. And actually, almost any cat can be accustomed to wearing collars through habituation. And so it's actually not a big deal to put a collar on your cat. And it should be seen the same as any dog wearing a collar or a leash.
Okay, thank you. It's too bad our friends from SAVE left before your suggestion. But Ms. Howard, did you want to?
I just was going to give you a little, I'm, as liaison to the Board of Health, the issue of licensing cats has come up, and this is one component of that, so perhaps you can feel free to reach out to me, and I can connect you. Perhaps you want to come to a Board of Health meeting, which might be a step in the process, and, you know, and I think that body would be happy to hear from you. We have meetings where there can be public comment, so if you just follow up with me on the website, I can talk to you about next steps. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Anybody else who'd like to speak to something that's not already on the agenda? Okay, seeing no one, we'll move on then to reports. And our first report tonight is on the relief efforts at Griggs Farm after the fire. And I'd like to invite up Ed Trisselli and Elisa Niera. Oh, no, just Ed Trisselli. If there's both of you, you're welcome to come sit at the table.
That's easier for you.
And while you're getting set up, we had to cancel our first meeting in January because there was an ice storm, or the people thought there was going to be an ice storm that night. But I was going to thank people then. I mean, there was just, and there has been even since then, just a tremendous outpouring from the community, and it's just another reminder of how lucky we are to live in a place like Princeton, where so many people step up when our neighbors are in need. But I'm going to turn it over to Ed, who's Executive Director of Princeton Community Housing.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. And yes,
You have to get your mic right
yes,
up close.
Sorry about that. Is that better? So I do want to echo what you just said, that this has been a tragedy since December 27th, but the good that has come from it has been overwhelming. And on behalf of the residents who have been displaced and affected by this tragedy and Princeton Community Housing, I do want to pass along the gratitude to the community for all that the community has done, and that includes the municipality as well, all the support that we have received and the residents displaced by the fire. So it has been, in that respect, a good thing and a good example of, yes, how this community takes care of its own. So that is wonderful. In terms of what's going on right now, I can give a brief update, and then ask you folks can ask questions. I also want to thank personally Elisa and the Human Services Department. Again, they have been tremendous in helping us to frankly deal with the emotional aspect and the social service aspect of this, and helping people to understand how we can help them and give some structure to that effort. And I think, you know, the professionalism of Elisa and her colleagues has been really, really helpful in that regard, and we're very thankful for that. There were 35 people who were affected by the fire, 23 households. You know, as many of you know, the town put the folks up who didn't have housing, emergency housing right away in the Nassau Inn the first evening, and then since that point, Princeton Community Housing has voluntarily provided emergency housing to the remainder of the folks who need it. Fortunately, some of the families were able to find family or friends or some arrangements, but at this point we still have, in emergency housing, we still have 17 households being accommodated. There are some families who have children. There are some families who are just a single person, so it really runs the whole gamut of a household size. We've been able to, again, through the efforts of the community, respond to some of the immediate needs through through clothing donations and food donations. I want to thank all the fire and police personnel, rescue squad, all who contributed to the food drive. That was really amazing. So in terms of those immediate household needs of clothing and food, I think we're in pretty good shape now. We're still very much in need of contributions. Gift cards, universal gift cards are very good for folks so they can go out and get what they need, what their household needs. And, you know, we've also had several families establish their own GoFundMe sites. In addition to those sites, there was one GoFundMe site that we were able to collaborate with, so that we were able to distribute the funds from that major GoFundMe effort directly to the families that have been affected. So we've been able to get those funds right out to those folks very quickly. In addition, we, Princeton Community Housing, are continuing to raise funds to be able to continue to support the emergency housing that we're providing. So I encourage everyone, if they haven't already done so, and we're thankful for those who have, to please, continue to support that effort on our part by donating to us and at our website, which is princetoncommunityhousing.org. Some of the immediate needs right now are helping residents get their belongings from their apartment to a safe place. We're working with volunteers, and again, this is where, Human Services and all the networking that they can do. We're working to gather volunteers to help people who need that help to get their belongings out of the building and into a safe place until they can have more permanent temporary housing, if that makes any sense. The reason I say more permanent temporary housing is because we understand that it will take approximately a year for the building to be restored. The condo association, the Griggs Farm Condo Association, is going to be leading the effort in terms of restoring the building, and that's the information we have from them. So we're in turn, trying to assist displaced residents to find housing for that 12-month period. And that's another effort that's simultaneously ongoing now, is that we are building a list of housing opportunities. As you can imagine, people want to stay in town if they can, because that's where they live, that's where they're from. And we're doing our best to put that list together, working with a lot of other organizations in town to see what resources may be available. We've also had people, bless them, who've just called us up and said, hey, I have a room in my house. I'm willing to share, my kitchen, and, so we're even keeping, track of all those opportunities too. It's really amazing how some people have come out to support that. So I'm probably talking too much. Maybe I'll stop and allow folks to ask questions, or if Elisa, if you have anything you'd like to add to that.
Ms. Krumler?
Are you still doing the GoFundMe, and which is the best place for people who would like to give donations? The website, the Princeton Community Housing website, is that more direct, or?
Yes, I would suggest the princetoncommunityhousing.org website for subsequent donations. Thank you.
Ms. Howard?
Just add my thanks and thank you for being so gracious and including Elisa in this, that I know Human Services Department has really worked closely with you on this. And just to tell everybody and my colleagues too, that at our Human Services Commission meeting last week, we did some thinking too about what we've learned from this horrible tragedy and how we can even be better at responding. And I hope you'll think too and let us know what we can do. It really is. I mean, I think it's heartening. The response is amazing, but I'm sure we can always do better. So if we can learn, and hopefully we won't have to put that into action anytime soon, but certainly using it as a learning opportunity. So thank you.
Yes, I agree. I think as much as you want to plan for things, so many things are unanticipated until you're actually experiencing them. But yes, we should all be planning as much as we possibly can.
Mr. Quinn?
So once again, I'd like to echo what's been said about the response and the community response, which has just been with partners and citizens coming together over what's usually a pretty quiet week of, kicking back, which was anything but for the people who were involved here. So if someone wanted to help move belongings out of damaged apartments, if they had a big truck and wanted to help out, who should they contact?
Yes, so those efforts are being, there's a lot of community members that have asked if they can help folks with some of the moving and relocation, particularly because they are low income and don't have the means to pay for a service. And so there's a particular person, so if people want to get in touch with Human Services, we can connect them to those volunteer efforts that are happening, and we're working hand in hand, but it's really community driven, which is really great, because certainly one less thing of our plates. And so, yeah, they can call our office and we can connect them. But we're looking to do some of these things on the weekend. So I know there is something happening this weekend. Also, as a municipality, we're working with Human Services is working with DPW to get a dumpster to be able to dispose of large, bulky items. So we're trying to figure that out, how we can help residents with that rather than having them drag it to River Road, and figuring out disposal fees and things like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank you also. Well, I mean, what a great job. I've been, I was wondering, God, the question was, where are they, where are they going to take the items that they take out of their homes? Like, are there places that are going to hold them for them? Because I'm wondering if we can contact places like on Quaker Ridge Road and some of these storage places and see if we can get a couple volunteer bins for a year or so. Because I'm wondering where they're going to place these items. It's one thing having something in your apartment that you can remove. It's another thing removing it to a safe environment. So I'm just wondering, have we thought about that?
Yes, and we've reached out to some of these storage unit, companies.
Sorry, Lisa, can you just make sure
okay.
you're in the mic?
We have reached out to some of those companies that provide storage, and we weren't very successful in getting anyone to agree to do it for free. Some of them did agree to offer some level of discount, but the reality is that it is very costly, especially thinking, for someone to pay for storage fees for a whole year. And so we did, one of the things that Ed mentioned was the $25,000 that was raised by Send Hunger Packing. That was specifically provided, a check was given to each household so that they could possibly offset the cost of storage. But nothing, if anyone, we'll certainly take anything we can for at a lower rate, yeah.
Anybody? I had a question that I guess this is more for my colleagues. I know that the town has some for sale affordable housing units that haven't been sold and so are vacant. And would there be interest in?
Yes, we actually discussed this. Maureen Followay, our affordable housing coordinator, has been leading the charge along with the board. We've actually discussed to permit this, to permit the homes that are for sale on our affordable stock to be used by some of these victims of the fire. Some of the locations, the condo associations have to agree to allow us to do that because they're for sale and not rental units. So they have been meeting at their various condo associations, and so far they have been agreeing for us to do that.
And just to add to that, also we have been identifying which households were already on the affordable housing sales wait list. And for those who may be interested in purchasing a unit, we have been making referrals to Maureen so that she can sit down with them and see if that's a possibility.
Okay, terrific. And then my sense is that there'd be interest in at least exploring that opportunity too, even if it means a little extra cost from the municipality. So keep us informed on how the board progresses on that. Anybody else? Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And now we'll move on to council reports. And I'll start again on my right. Mr. Quinn, any reports?
No reports.
Ms. Howard, any reports?
Yes, I just have one brief one. We have on our agenda later 2 resolutions dealing with our efforts with amplifying and ramping up actually our efforts to support immigrants in our community. But one, we'll get to those later, but one that I just wanted to sort of get hopefully a nodding of heads is whether we can join as amicus in pending litigation. Some of you will remember, not our 2 new members weren't here in the fall when we did this, but that last year we joined as amicus in litigation. Santa Clara and San Francisco were suing the Department of Justice, challenging President Trump's executive order saying he was going to defund sanctuary cities, or so-called sanctuary cities. Well, the good news was that in November, a judge in California ruled with those municipalities and blocked the federal government from defunding them. But the U.S. Department of Justice is appealing that decision, and so we again have an opportunity now to sign on as amicus in that pending litigation. And I assume we would want to do that again too. Just as a reminder, we're not actually directly impacted because of the size of the municipality. We don't get these kinds of grants, but we thought it was important to stand up with other municipalities and to support their right to pursue policing strategies that we believe, protect everyone in the community. So it's sort of, I think this is one where I just need some nods that we would continue our work there. And then can you let the lawyers know that we'll join that amicus? Did I miss anything?
Well, it's no cost to the
And
municipality.
it's no
either.
cost to the municipality, we're just adding our name. It's you making a phone call, right?
Right, so yes, I'll let the attorney know.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Limerick?
No, I gave my affordable housing report. I'm good.
Ms. Carvalho?
As you know, the freebie started its new schedule, and it went smoothly. Apparently, people got the message. They had handed out flyers and got people know. And some people have responded positively to the earlier neighborhood service, so that's pretty good. But we don't have the ridership reports yet for that for January, obviously. But I just also wanted to report that on January 1st, we had the highest number of passengers. I mean, December 1st, and that was 138 passengers. So that was an all-time high. I'm not sure why that would be, but... Well, no, that was before the new schedule. So hopefully the new schedule will be even better, yep.
Mr. Crown?
I have a quick report I wanted to give on the Historic Preservation Commission. I met with them for their first meeting of the year on January 11th. And in particular, I wanted to draw to the attention the members of the council that one of their goals for the year actually aligns nicely with one of our goals for the year. Their goal is to regain what's called CLG, or Certified Local Government Status, which is a rating that's awarded by the state's Historic Preservation Office. Both the former borough and the former township had this designation before consolidation, but it was withdrawn upon consolidation, and when it was reapplied for, the application was denied because there are certain aspects of the harmonized ordinance that don't measure up to what the state's Historic Preservation Office requires. So getting that CLG status is a top priority for the commission. And the way that it aligns with our priorities is that at our goal-setting retreat, we talked about getting design guidelines implemented for the historic districts in town. And it's a heavy lift. It's something that they probably need consultant assistance with. And unless they have their CLG status, they can't be eligible for grants from the state for that work. So I think in order to expedite our goal of getting those design standards, we need to help expedite their goal. And so I just wanted to make sure that was on the radar of all the members of council.
Terrific. Ms. Fraga?
No reports at this time.
Okay, terrific. So I have several reports. I apologize. We'll try to go through them quickly. The first is that the council met at the very beginning of the year on a goal setting and priority setting. And we set out 4 priority areas for the year. The first one is affordability, and that includes cost savings, budget savings, and also investing in affordable housing. Second priority is more user-friendly government. And you've heard we're working on revamping the website, and we're hoping to have that rolled out in the next couple months. There's been some initial staff training on that, and we're starting to migrate over to the new site, as well as using more of the online forms, and doing other things too. We'll be talking in a minute about smart meters. The third priority is broad category of sustainability, smart growth, and wellness. And the fourth is inclusion and social justice. So over the course of this month and probably the beginning of next month, we'll be talking to all of our boards and commissions and talking within our council committees to think about how we can all be working towards these goals together and align the work that we're doing. Also, for those of you who didn't hear, Governor Murphy was in Princeton last week to sign the third executive order of his administration, and this one was on economic development, and he held the event at Tiger Labs on Nassau Street, and it was to highlight the importance of the innovation and startup economy to our state. And I think it's really a great sign that he decided to have that event here in Princeton. He said he'd be refocusing the efforts of the state's Economic Development Authority towards investments in smaller businesses and startups engaged in the innovation economy. And this is one of the reasons why this is great news for Princeton, is that under the prior version of the EDA, Princeton didn't qualify for any of the state incentive money because all of our businesses and all of our spaces were too small. Governor Murphy also talked about the importance of fully funding public schools and investing in New Jersey transit, and he made the connection between those investments and the health and growth of our economy. And I was able to be there. I'm happy with many of my colleagues, Mr. Quinn, Mr. Liverman, Mr. Cohen, and Ms. Fraga were all there. Were you there? No, your presence was there. So that was a great event, and he loves coming to Tiger Labs apparently, so hopefully he'll be back for more events. The Neighborhood Character and Zoning Committee met last week, and we met with Jim Constantine, who's our new consultant, and we're working on a series of recommendations for new ordinances that will be coming to council regulating volume, bulk, and massing controls. And the committee is planning to hold an open workshop and have draft ordinances ready sometime in March for a potential council introduction. And they're going to deal with topics such as building height, grading, massing, how garages are oriented, coverage, landscaping. And later, after we finish that chunk of ordinances, we're going to be moving on to use and density controls, and this falls in line with our affordability goal. So broadening the definition of accessory apartments and two-family dwellings, and also looking at design standards for attached and detached accessory apartments and two-family dwellings that would also make it easier for people to add a second unit to their property. I also attended the library board meeting. Library is going to be working. I see Brett Bonfield in the back in his special seat. You're always welcome to sit closer to. But the library is going to be working on a 3-year strategic plan. And for anybody who's been to the library recently who has little kids, you'll notice that the 3rd floor has been closed for renovations. And they're going to be doing, I know everyone has probably seen the amazing 2nd floor renovation. And the 3rd floor renovation is going to be a bit of a junior version, I guess, of the 2nd floor renovation. But it's the same idea where they're moving all the books in the middle and creating more space. Right now, the baby things are all over the place. They're going to be concentrating a lot of the baby space in one area called Baby World. And they're going to be creating a breastfeeding room as part of that, which is one of the things the library heard from as a need. And they're going to be converting the room right now that has games for kids in the back into a tech room, like a little lab makerspace. So that's something else that's exciting. And that's supposed to be opening soon in mid-February. And I think we're all kids at heart. So when you're coming to check out the 2nd floor, I encourage everybody to go up to the 3rd floor and take a look. And I also want to congratulate the library on getting 2 grants. One was a $10,000 grant for adult English language learners. And the second was a small grant, but a prestigious one. And now I lost that part of what that was for. What was that? Oh, you're right, for anti-ageism. And I think Princeton was the smallest town, and it was like Los Angeles and Brooklyn, and all these giant other libraries who were the other recipients. There were 6 that were given out. And that was it for my reports. Are there any reports from staff? Nope.
Mayor, if I could, I'd be remiss in not taking this opportunity to remind the community that while the third floor is closed at the library, Youth Services is providing a range of services in the community room, and it's all tricked out for kids, including a version of the popular fish tank. So if you're looking for story time, it's in the community room. Thank you.
Ms. Stockton?
I just wanted to advise council that we are out to bid currently with the Mary Moss Playground renovation plans, and bids will be accepted on January 30th. If all of the paperwork is in order from the most responsive and responsible bidder, then we will be looking to bring an award of contract to council on February 12th. The contract is set up so that the park will be open and usable by I think it's June 15th.
Terrific, thank you. Any other staff reports? Nope, okay, then we'll move on to one of the main items on the agenda tonight, and that's the presentation of the Princeton parking study. And I'll turn it over. Ms. Stockton, do you want to start by giving an introduction? I do want to say that this is one of the big community meetings we're having on the parking study, but this is not the end of the discussion. So we're going to be coming back to council with some ordinance recommendations, with going out to bid for new meter technology and some of the other things we'll be discussing tonight. But there'll be no decisions made tonight, but it's an important part of the discussions. With that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Stockton.
So in 2017, Princeton Engineering and Planning departments were successful in receiving a grant from We were successful in receiving a grant from the DVRPC, which is our Metropolitan Planning Organization, for this parking study. And it is a parking study that is mainly directed at the economic vitality of our downtown area, but we over time have observed that there is conflicts with the edges of our downtown area where we have the residential development abutting the commercial districts. So we went through a process of soliciting 4 proposals nationwide, and we chose Nelson Nygaard to come in and be our consultant for this project. They hail from Boston area of Massachusetts. And so we started back in March of 2017 with public meetings, with stakeholder interviews, and also online surveys, and conducted a series of 3 public meetings from March, May essentially, up to the last meeting was in November actually, I'm sorry. And so now we are here with Nelson Nygaard to present the final parking study report and really to review the recommendations specifically that they are putting in the report for Princeton to move ahead with. And so the engineering staff is also available after the presentation if there are more specific questions as to what we are envisioning the next steps to be. But at this point, I'll turn it over to Tom Brown with Nelson Nygaard.
Before Tom starts, I just wanted to let everybody know that the full parking study is available up on the website now. So the existing website, you can see why we want to do a revamp. There's a lot of sort of material up there, but if you go on one of the right-hand menu, and if you scroll down, one of the blue boxes says parking study, and you can click on that, and it'll bring you to all of the materials, including the latest version of the report.
I think we're just working with the audio visual to make sure that the presentation comes up above you and on your screens.
Thank you. That was a great introduction. Thank you, Deanna. I'll try not to go over what she's already talked about. I do have a brief introduction, though. A little overview of the study, and then I'm going to jump right into key findings, issues, and opportunities, and then go into some of the higher level recommendations. And I think it's a very good point. These are expert opinions based on what we knew going into the study, what we found, both looking at the hard measures of how much parking you have today and how it's utilized during peak demand times, but also outreach to the community. But ultimately, these recommendations are yours, starting with Deanna, but then also council and planning and other stakeholders to work with as you move forward toward implementation. But this is where we are at in terms of the end of the study for us. Revisiting the project goals, as Deanna said, this was very focused on economic vitality. Downtown commercial, mixed use, live, work, play environments are all the rage. Real estate community knows it, the development community knows it, and the folks like Princeton that have it they know it and they want to help preserve it, and parking is really a big part of that. So all of these goals really speak to a lot of that, as well as specific challenges, including one of the things that comes up commonly in very successful downtowns is we have a lot of service workers, they have parking needs, the market value of parking is very high. How do we make sure that these jobs are accessible to everyone? And residential parking issues was a big issue that we knew about coming into the study. A quick roadmap that describes what we did for the study, the basic steps. As you see, it combines hard data analysis, talking to users of the parking system, stakeholders, planners, staff, local experts, including developers and business owners, and all along the way, listening, hearing, thinking, putting what we know to work, and working with Deanna and staff to develop our analysis into recommendations. Again, a quick overview of some of the key issues that we saw. And this is very common. I've worked in some places where they really absolutely do run out of all available parking when they are busy, so I try not to be skeptical. But universally, when we start these studies, there is a common perception that there's nowhere to park here. And it's actually good news to find out that you do. The issue is not raw supply, but management. There's almost always more parking than people realize out there. Often that parking may not be accessible to them. It may be signed as private parking, so if I'm going to just shop in Princeton, I'm not going anywhere in particular. A lot of the parking that's out there may not be available to me. But again, there are management opportunities to address that. And just in general, the parking that is controlled and available to the public, there is availability. Often people don't know about it, or they're circling the same few blocks that they know or that they're comfortable with in terms of how they pay for parking, and they're not really utilizing all of the infrastructure that's out there. So that really zeroed in on management as being one of the key areas of opportunity, particularly for the commercial area of the downtown. Three-quarters of the off-street supply we found is privately controlled. So, and a lot of that is already being made use of during the off hours. For example, Princeton University makes a lot or all of its off-street lots and parking structures, like the one in this picture, available after 6, I believe, and on the weekends. Our surveys indicated, our utilization surveys indicated it's likely a lot of folks don't know about it. It's not the most convenient parking if you're going to downtown, but our sense is that more people knew about it, it would be better utilized than it seems to be today. And really beyond that, there are more opportunities, maybe including some closer in privately controlled parking facilities that could be brought into a similar shared parking arrangement. So this fact that there's a lot of different owners of the parking infrastructure out there, which makes it a bit of a complex environment to navigate as someone looking for parking. That and some of the pricing cues that reinforce a strong preference among most downtown drivers to look for on-street parking first creates a lot of congestion within those spaces in your downtown. And by pricing cues, I simply mean that if off-street parking is actually more expensive than on-street, then I'm even more inclined to keep circling and looking for a space on-street. Again, getting back to the residential issues, one of the things that's easy to see, I walked the district, the township last fall, and just wandering through a few neighborhoods, you can see that the conditions are quite varied. Obviously, on some blocks, there is a need for proactive management, and you have that out there. You have permit controls, you have time limits. Other streets, there were very few cars parked there, and so to us, that spoke to a need for moving away from kind of what you have right now as a one-size-fits-all kind of model, which can be great. A simple program is great, but in some ways, we thought varying the program and the regulations would help improve conditions for those different areas, your residential neighborhoods. And then one of the things that we were asked to look at from the beginning is how is the zoning code supporting, again, retaining what we have that works very well, but moving forward into the future, building upon that and making sure that we attract the growth that we want, the growth and investment, while maintaining that walkable urban environment that is really key to the economic and quality of life vitality that you do have here. In the last section, I will go over a set of strategies that we are recommending. We've organized these into 6 different buckets. Rebalancing demand, and so again, that speaks to making sure that all that you have, and especially the parking that's available, is utilized in a fairly balanced way so that demand isn't all sort of congesting in the downtown core, creating frustration and the sense that there's a lack of parking that may not actually be there. Reducing demand, so opportunities to, you have a lot of service sector employees, as we mentioned, the cost of parking is a barrier, and oftentimes it's actually easier to make it cheaper or free to get to those jobs via transit or other modes, rather than trying to figure out how to get parking and subsidize the cost so that it's affordable. So areas like that where you can reduce parking demand and free up more of that infrastructure. Optimizing parking management, so all of the pieces kind of move together in synergy and create a system that's user-friendly. So again, if there is parking out there and available, I have the information and the resources to know where it is and to what it might cost, what the time limits might be, and drive right to where that opportunity may be rather than showing up downtown and driving around. Expanding effective capacities, and that's a little bit different than building raw supply. It basically means, can you park more cars in what you have? So things like valet, Jack actually mentioned earlier, where there may be areas where you can add supply that you don't have today, metering in areas where that might create short-term parking opportunities where needs are not being met today. Improving the residential parking experience and updating the zoning code, as I mentioned before. So rebalancing really for us starts with the on-street parking. Again, as I said, it tends to be the most congested parking resource in any vibrant, walkable downtown. And so really being clear on what kind of performance measures you're going to be looking at and what performance targets you're seeking. And you don't want to have 50% availability because you're wasting resources, but you want 1 or 2 spaces available on each block and a reasonable amount of availability in off-street facilities so that drivers see, I can park pretty much wherever I want to. I'm going to make my decision based on price or convenience or time limits, but pretty much in wherever I would prefer to park, there will be a space available. That's ultimately the performance that you're seeking. And really, parking rates are the most intuitive, the most effective tool there is. So we usually start with that. You have meters today, so it's nothing new. What we're talking about is tweaking the pricing strategy so that it's intuitive, it's transparent, and again, drivers know where to go for the parking that best fits their needs. And usually, and our utilization surveys bore this out, but usually that involves maybe looking at a premium zone. So if I want the most convenient, the best spots in, basically Palmer Square and the close-in blocks to that, that's going to be a higher rate. And out from there might be value parking and then discount or free parking beyond that. It creates a predictable environment, but it helps incentivize some drivers to park at more distant blocks than they might otherwise if everything was the same price. And again, this speaks to getting toward that target of availability. And one of the strategies we've been talking with Jack and Deanna about from the beginning, or really from the beginning of developing these recommendations, is you can actually set rates so that they go up the longer you stay. And one of the benefits of that is that most drivers stay within the time limits. They park for an hour or 2 hours. And if you increase the price for longer stays, that puts the burden of those pricing strategies for high demand parking, high demand spaces on those that stay longer, and really things stay the same for the very short term parkers. Or, even if you make it a half an hour is the low rate and it goes up from there, people know, well, but that's where I want to be. I just will, make a short trip there. It creates more opportunities for people to right-size their parking options according to their sort of needs in terms of balancing convenience with cost. So we did make some specific recommendations in terms of setting those prices. In the premium zone, $2 an hour. The base rate, or sort of the value zones, $1.50 an hour, and the discount areas at $1 an hour. And key to this is monitoring performance. This was a big part of the study itself, was counting spaces and counting cars at those critical times, which tend to be weekdays at midday and Friday or Saturday night when your demand is highest, and seeing if those prices are doing what you want it to do, and if they're not, to think about adjusting those rates. And part of the value of that is making it very transparent. We're not charging $2 an hour because we have a budget hole we need to fill. We're charging $2 an hour because that's what we need to keep things flowing within the system so that there's a parking space available to you when you need it. A big part of this, sorry, this is one exclamation mark I forgot to take out. We had a very enthusiastic associate in Boston who put a lot of exclamation marks in these slides. But it is important aligning meter hours with demand. This is a picture from Penn State where we did a study last summer. And I took a picture of this because I think those are the hours I've been talking with a lot of clients about moving toward. Really, and this, you can see this especially on Hullfish. The economies of these downtowns are really moving away from errand running and even a lot of retail in general, and moving toward food and beverage, which means you're starting to see more of a peak period, not just Friday and Saturday nights, but an evening-based economy. And so that weekday, midday period is going to stay a peak. It's a strong one. That's when the commuters, the employees are still there if you have an office or institutional presence. But all those dinner times, those food and beverage, those times when people are out meeting their friends and socializing, cutting off the meters at 5 and 6 o'clock is really a disservice to the parking environment at those times. I've worked in many places where the common narrative is that's when the evening shift of restaurant workers show up, where they show up at 4 or 5, put an hour's worth of money into the meter, and they have the best parking spaces for the rest of the night. You already do this to a certain extent. You meter till 8 in a lot of your spaces. We recommend on Friday and Saturday nights pushing that out a little bit. At the same time, I rarely, when I did walk around here in the fall, and I've seen this in many places, at 8 a.m. there's often not enough demand where you need to be pricing. And two of the opportunities that you can create by shifting that from 8 a.m. start to a 10 a.m. is you create a lot more loading and unloading opportunities. You make it clear to deliveries that before 10 a.m. you can have pretty much the whole block. You don't have to worry about the two-hour meter payment. But it also gives that period of free access to downtown shops and errand running, which can be a very good, I think, marketing, putting out the information. Again, we're not charging when we don't have to. This is a period of free parking for those who really value that to come downtown. Simplifying the regulations, so not having a whole lot of customized and various levels of time limits. You have the 12-hour time limits in certain areas, but other than that, really 2 hours is, if you're pricing effectively, you don't really need to micromanage the time limits too much once you're in that short-term parking zone. And again, the meter schedule is recommending 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Friday and Saturday. Witherspoon being the exception. On that day when I was walking around, Witherspoon was busy from 8 a.m. and pretty full. So you need the pricing then on that street, I think. And you're already doing meters on Sundays, which again, you're ahead of the game compared to a lot of cities from 1 to 8, which seems that's probably what I would have recommended anyway, so no change there. In many cities, I know we've been talking with Deanna and Jack about how to effectively communicate this, but a lot of the cities that are metering into the evenings, they're not taking time limits into those time periods. Again, because a lot of the activity is not just picking something up and running home. You're eating, you're going to a movie, you're meeting with friends. So this is an example from Seattle. They make it 3 hours after 5 p.m. I know the District of Columbia, after 5 p.m., there are no time limits. It can complicate the signage to get that message out, but that can be an effective way to soften the blow maybe of charging in periods when you had free parking before. Reducing demand, you've got a lot of resources out here. One of the things that changed from the time that I was out here in the fall to now, the bike share program has expanded. It's got a real presence downtown. I've seen a few stations just walking around this evening. You've got great walkability. We put some details on some bicycle facilities that might be useful. You've got the freebie, which you mentioned before. That's great. You're getting great ridership. Marketing that. And also, two things, making sure that those are connected, that the parking study is really not just about parking. It's about access to the downtown and seeing all these things as pieces of how you keep your downtown accessible to all, including those who don't have cars or don't particularly care to drive. Making sure that the freebie is well known, including a predictable route, and that it serves those needs, particularly if we're going to bring in some of those parking resources like Princeton's parking facilities or some that may not be right in the heart of downtown. If that's where the cheaper free parking is, if people know that they can get to the core of downtown on a free bus, that makes it all the more valuable. A few recommendations for optimizing the overall systems. The parking system, again, getting back to the fact that a lot of the parking, including a lot of the parking that is publicly available, is commercial parking. It's privately controlled. Moving it toward a unified, coordinated system where if I go to look for information about where I can park, what it's going to cost, and even if you move into an availability, communicating real-time availability, that it looks like one system to the driver, even if it may have various owners. We spoke to one of the owners of a lot of the commercial parking downtown. I think they're all aboard, the devil's in the details, but they're happy to have the town advertise their parking alongside the town's. And for the driver, the more information, the better. The key points are before arrival, so people that do bother to plan trips like that know where the parking is and can figure out what their best fit is. Wayfinding and signage that reinforce that once they get to the downtown and tell them where to go. And post-arrival, once they get to their space, it's clear that this is the space they were looking for. It's going to be priced the way they expected it and regulated the way they expected it. All those pieces go into a coordinated communication campaign, which again, to the user, can look like one complete unified system that may not be underneath. And so unifying the wayfinding is a big part of that, creating a map. Lots of strategies for that, and a lot of that tends to be low-cost stuff. Expanding payment options to the town's credit. Deanna and Jack, folks at the town, moving forward with new meters. To us, the big piece of that is making it easy to pay either with a credit card or digitally. I know that's the next piece that we're talking to Deanna about, is how do you bring pay by phone to complement those new meters. It tends to be very popular where it's available, and it also ties into some of the shared parking strategies that I'll be talking about in a little bit. Also ties into parking validation. One of the things that came up was the library system of validation. A lot of downtowns, merchants are very interested in exploring validation. I'd not seen many downtowns do it particularly well. Boulder, Colorado has this system they've had for decades with tokens. Works very well there. I've not seen a lot of cities adopt that though. Pay by phone seems to be creating a new opportunity to do digital validation, which can be done in one of two ways. You get a code before your trip that you can use to pay for the meter, or future validation where you do some business at a downtown shop or restaurant and you get a code for your next trip that you can use to pay for the parking, either at the meter or pay by phone. Kind of a higher level recommendation, and this gets back to seeing all these pieces as a cohesive whole in terms of making your downtown accessible. A parking benefit district, capturing parking revenue. It also gets back to the message of we're not doing this for the money for other needs, we're doing this for the parking system. If you can make it clear that all the meter revenue, all the off-street revenue go into the parking system, then make a better system, and also to help fund things like the freebie for those who want to access downtown in a non-driving mode. We call that a parking benefit district, but it really, the heart of it is an enterprise fund, so that all the parking revenues get captured and controlled for the purpose of parking and mobility. Investing in enforcement technology, we're talking with Deanna about this, but if you can move into using your license plate readers for enforcement, not only is it more effective, but it also gets to that performance monitoring. Effectively, every plate read is a car counted, which means if you're out there enforcing with license plate readers, you're also monitoring your utilization, particularly in the on-street spaces where that kind of enforcement, or sorry, performance measurement is most valuable. Getting to expanding capacities, and this picture is from Asheville, North Carolina. It's the first place I saw this. And getting to that idea of using pay by phone to expand some of the shared parking opportunities of the downtown, this kind of percolated up in Asheville, North Carolina, kind of organically. I talked to the folks at Passport, which happens to be the pay by phone app in Asheville, and private lot owners, offices, churches, houses of worship, reached out to them and said, can we use the city's pay by phone app to charge for our lots in the evenings and weekends? And I don't know how long ago that started, but if you go there today, those signs are everywhere in these lots, and it says something along these lines, which daily until 7 you have to have a permit. After that, it's $2, $3, $5. And that ability to monetize that off-hour capacity really seems to be the thing that is getting those lot owners over the hurdle of liability, which was always the thing that killed dialogue about shared parking in these areas. So if you do, or as you start looking at pay by phone, that is an opportunity. An example of a city that's done this proactively is Park Omaha, which has done two things. They've used that the technology to monetize off-hour capacity among private parking facility owners as part of an explicit policy goal to not build any more city parking. But they've also created that unified system. They have a website that shows you where the parking is, and it actually shows city facilities and what they call partner facilities, just in 2 shades of blue. But it looks like one unified system. And the screen grab at the bottom is an application process. So if you own a parking facility, you can apply right on their website to be a partner facility for that. Another way to get more capacity out of your existing facilities, including on-street spaces, is looking at flexible curbside regulations. So again, something that might be a loading zone from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. becomes short-term parking when that's most needed, and rotates accordingly. I've seen a lot of loading zones that are signed 24/7. They're rarely needed to that extent, and particularly in a walkable downtown, those spaces are very valuable for parking at other times. And this picture is of Witherspoon Street. Witherspoon, right? I walked up that street again today to get here. This I took in that afternoon in the fall. not a lot of utilization, a lot of meters, and one of the things that we've talked about is creating employee permits to get to that need for low-cost parking opportunities. If you have a manageable amount of permits that you provide to downtown employees that exempt them from the time limit and the meter payment, could create more utilization on these streets, make them feel a little more lively, and provide more access to jobs for your downtown, again, making use of infrastructure you already have. And then new areas where Deanna and Jack are already planning to install new meters, which will create more short-term parking opportunities in areas of need. I don't know if you wanted to say anything about the thought behind those particular blocks.
The council members may recall that we had a work session last year about parking, and there were a few decisions that were made, and so Nelson Nygaard has brought those forward and included them in the recommendations, one of which is installing the meters on Witherspoon Street near the Avalon development and on Henry, and then coordinating the meter times or regulations with those on Franklin, to again look at having that 85% occupancy, so that we do have turnover and availability in that area as it's redeveloping with service industry and restaurants. And then the other piece of that was also to extend overnight parking at the Princeton branch station at the Dinky lot, within the municipal parking area at the lot from a maximum of 3-day stay up to 7-day stay. So that we could provide that extended time to our residents who want to take that vacation and don't want to take the car and park at Princeton Junction or at the airport.
Thank you. The strategies for improving conditions in the residential areas. Basically, we looked at just ways to sort of normalize the permit system that you have today. It's very similar to the system that we worked with in Montclair, New Jersey a few years ago, where even if you got a permit, it's an overnight permit. It doesn't exempt you from time limits during the day. So looking at starting with making sure that you have one permit that allows you to basically use the curb parking in front of your house on your street in a more typical way for a resident permit, which is you would be exempt from daytime time limits as well as overnight parking ban. Update the rate structure below. So looking at the two buckets of households, those with off-street parking would be allowed to get one permit at $30 per quarter. Those without would be allowed to get two permits, one at the cheaper rate of $30 per year. The second would be at that same rate of $30 per quarter as the households with off-street parking. So not a lot of, it's still pretty controlled compared to most resident permits. I've worked in places like, even in Center City, Philadelphia, the households could get an unlimited number of permits, which is definitely not a best practice. So I like the idea of limiting those where you do have capacity issues, but moving toward a little bit more availability for permits and normalizing the parking privileges that those permits do provide. Some elements that we do like to keep flexible so that streets or neighborhoods can sort of customize how they want those permits to work. Starting with, if you don't have a permit, what are your options? And I've seen cities where all of these options are the norm. Either you can't park here at all without a permit, or you have 1 hour or 2 hours of parking. So setting those restrictions on non-permit vehicles can be left somewhat flexible. The schedule of permit enforcement, do you want it 7 days a week? Is it more of a daytime need versus an evening need? Again, those tend to vary by location, and I think it's okay to change the regulations for that and right fit them for the street or neighborhood. And similar to what I was talking about before with Witherspoon, we've seen in places like Aspen and Austin, Texas, where you have a resident permit program, but during the daytime, they'll allow the city to sell employee permits that are good from 9 to 5 or whatever the hours are set, and that revenue goes toward a resident benefit program. And it helps keep jobs accessible, which adds to the vitality, and so sort of a cohesive system. So that could be one option. And updating the permit media and distribution, so creating a web portal so folks can register online and renew their permits online. And transitioning away from physical permits. This is maybe a bit longer term, but I know some cities in in Pennsylvania are moving away from permits that are physical toward simple license plate registration, and again, using license plate reader enforcement for that purpose. And getting away from right now, what you have is a system for visitor permits of calling up the police department. So again, formalizing the process and normalizing the process for securing visitor permits that don't involve these sort of calling up the police department, describing your situation, and getting a sort of an ad hoc permit for your visitors, which is an ongoing need for residents in urban areas. Finally, updating the zoning code. So some of the issues that were brought up, change of use development, not wanting to discourage needed investment in established buildings and infill projects that change the use but don't have a lot of impact. So what we recommended is waiving parking requirements that are very small, 3 spaces or less, where you really don't, the worst outcome of that is often for someone to carve out a very small, inefficient lot just to meet a parking requirement, or the project doesn't pencil out because of the requirement. For those that would still have a requirement, providing an in lieu fee alternative so that they can contribute to, again, parking and mobility that's managed and provided by the town versus trying to fit it onto some of these very small infill lots. And some ideas for exploring how to structure the in lieu fee rate structure so that, again, you really encourage the smaller projects to pay the fee versus providing parking. And as the projects get larger and they have a more feasible footprint for parking, more of those would actually just provide parking. So some details on the in lieu fee credits I won't go into, but lots of precedents for that. There's a bit of an art and science to what do you charge, but basically you want to make sure you're charging a meaningful amount so that you don't take in these fees for years but never accumulate enough money to do anything of value with. But at the same time, you want it to be an attractive so that those projects do go forward. And moving into the future of uncertainty in terms of mobility and how it's a lot of predictions and hand-wringing, particularly among the people that are paying for parking infrastructure these days, about how much parking is going to be needed 5, 10, 20 years from now. And particularly off-street parking, it's built to last for 50 or more years. So looking at zoning codes, because that is the window that you're looking at when you're defining code, is shifting away from a tight focus on parking, but allowing developers to meet their requirements with on-site parking or mobility amenities or demand management programs, or again, that fee in lieu alternative. That's that. Thank you for listening. That's a lot of information.
Thank you. That was a lot of food for thought. So the way I think we should structure this is we'll start with council. If there's questions folks up here have, then I'd like to open it up for anybody who came who has thoughts they'd like to share, and then we'll bring it back and maybe ask Deanna for some guidance on next steps and talk about what we want to accomplish certainly for 2018 on this. So why don't we start, Ms. Krummeller and then Mr. Cohen.
I have a couple questions. I guess the first one is about the development and reducing the parking requirements and instead accepting money for a project down the road. What does that do to the people who, the ecosystem that's already there? I mean, right now it sounds like we're pretty full, and so if we wanted to encourage more development downtown, how would the parking work? Which I support the idea, but I don't understand how it would work, especially if we're not, we're actually talking about providing employee parking on our streets, and we're talking about expanding parking for residents. So and then we also are going to have new development come in. So how does it all work if there isn't enough parking?
So let me be clear, and I probably wasn't clear enough in the presentation. The employees parking on the street is very limited blocks where you can document that the spaces aren't being utilized very well. So it's sort of spaces that wouldn't have a car in them otherwise. I think one of our conclusions is that there is enough parking. It's just not in the right places or not accessible to the folks that might be looking for it at any given time. But the way that the in lieu fee would work is that goes into a pool of money that the city can either secure a parking lot and improve it for public access, or at the higher scale, many cities have built parking lots and structures out of that money, or what more places like where we've worked, Ann Arbor and Montgomery County, Maryland, they've gone into joint development deals with developers. So when you're not talking about an infill project, but something at a larger scale, the city provided a public parking structure as part of a private development. So the developer just uses the public parking structure, and that's available not just to the development. That's at the higher scale. At the lower scale, it could be something like, using that money to create a Park Omaha type program, so you have a very dynamic real-time availability website, and outreach to private lot owners to bring in those resources as maybe suitable and a real opportunity once they're able to monetize it. Another way that some cities do it is the fee in lieu may not be cash, but it may be parking permits in a city garage that may have overnight capacity. So again, the devil is in the details. This is sort of a higher level recommendation, but we will keep talking with Deanna and have been in terms of what those details might be specific to the Princeton circumstance.
Okay, and so my second question is, well, two things. Were you aware that I believe that our town has a higher than average number of people who walk to work right now? It's something that we brag about. And so when we're talking about expanding residential, giving residents permits, new permits, so expanding capacity, I think you've said, right? That's what a way to expand capacity would be, to allow overnight parking.
That wasn't so much, the opportunity there to me wasn't so much expanding capacity as addressing concerns that we heard through the outreach process in terms of those who have the need, whether it's occasional or ongoing, to use their curbside parking but can't. So it's a combination of an expressed need and the fact that you have capacity on many of those streets to accommodate that through more of a normalized resident permit program.
Okay, but it's expanding. I mean, right now, we kind of have our policy is basically people are, we don't provide private parking spots, and you're talking about kind of a new system where we're providing parking, but with permits, expanding that greatly. We do have some of that.
Yeah.
So I'm worried about that because I feel like we have a kind of an ecosystem right now that encourages people to buy houses, and especially since the university is our largest employer, I think that people who decide to move close to the university and walk to the university, they have a slight discount on their house. As you said in your report, the property values are lower when when you don't have as much parking. I mean, property prices are lower. And so I'm worried about changing that ecosystem downtown as far as residences, because I think we do have people who work, we do have people who manage to live there and don't have cars or have only one. So I wanted to express to everyone my real concern about that.
So I'm sorry, is your sense that more people will bring more cars?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. I mean, I've already heard from people, my son can't get a car because we have no place to park. So if we can get a permit, we're going to park. I think there's no doubt that that getting rid of the overnight parking ban is going to bring traffic and cars into the town that weren't there before. So the other thing is, the other issue that you might not be aware of, and is that there is also kind of an underground system, or not underground, but it's just a system of private arrangements. And it's been there, you know, the borough has, or the town has had this policy of no overnight parking for decades, and people have dealt with it by people who don't need the parking and have it in their driveway. They rent out their spaces to their neighbors, and it goes on all throughout the downtown. And so I think another consequence, if we do get rid of the downtown, or we start expanding our permit and letting people buy permits, is those people who are doing that are going to stop doing that, or they're not going to be able to do it anymore. We just have to be aware of that. It might lower the, you know, they're not going to be able to get that income that they're relying on if they're old or something like that. So I think we have to really worry about that. And then the last question is what should we do for employees? Should we provide free parking? Like right now, we kind of we do provide it because some of them park on some of our streets. I know there's some unregulated streets that are empty, like Wiggins right now. It often has spots that employees could park on, and they line the other streets for free. But so is that but what about employers who have gotten permits for their, you know, or in a garage, or they've bought a parking lot and provide parking? So what should our policy be for providing employee parking? I mean, maybe it's that we do want to provide free parking for our employers because we want to help our downtown. But I think we have to be explicit and purposeful in changing our policy if we do.
Do you want to respond? Maybe that was more of a rhetorical question. Or
Yeah.
Well, no, I want to know.
Okay.
I really do want to know
Yeah.
what the policy is. And I haven't even gone to talk about global warming, but.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of, if you have spaces on your street that aren't being utilized, if you can provide that as low cost or free cost employee parking, at the same time looking to make sure that a transit commute is free as well. I think a coordinated approach, and again, not just looking at parking, but making access to downtown jobs as cheap as possible, including, you know, potentially free. So a Zagster membership, a bus pass. I know in New Jersey, you don't just have New Jersey Transit, but often New Jersey Transit can be a tough commute to make. But often that means that you can get an even steeper discount from the transit provider for an unlimited pass because they know only a small portion of the employees will use it. So,
But isn't it sufficient, I mean, isn't it necessary for something like that to work, that parking has to be restricted? It doesn't seem like you can do both at the same time.
The spaces, one of the reasons why I imagine permits for Witherspoon Street parking working is they're probably not the most convenient spaces for a lot of downtown employees. I think some of them will find them attractive, especially if it's a low cost. But we're certainly not recommending putting a free parking lot in the core of downtown. And really, people like free parking, but they really like convenience almost as much. And so I don't see a viable path to free parking anywhere near where convenience might not outweigh the demand for the employer to figure out some other option.
Mr. Cohen? Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually want to comment as somebody who used to be a downtown employee and who had to deal with, well, I lived close enough that I didn't have to deal with the parking issue, but I did anyway because sometimes I didn't feel like walking into town. And, you know, the reality is that people who work in town know where the closest free parking is, and wherever it is, they're going to park there and they're going to walk from there. So I think that the answer for me would be to have low-cost permits that allow employees to park on these residential streets that are far enough from downtown that they're not taking traffic away from the stores. It gives low cost, not free parking, because it allows you to monitor and enforce and make sure that, you know, they're not taking parking space away from residents who need them or whatever, but I think it needs to be part of the overall system. So that being said, first I want to say I love, your study and your recommendations. Like 98% of it is fantastic.
Great. My mom came in at 97, so thank you.
But of course, I'm going to talk about the 2% that I don't like. Basically, my concern is, I came to the December presentation and you had that beautiful slide of all the empty parking spaces on Witherspoon.
Yeah.
And I said, wait a minute, that's my bike lane you're suggesting giving away as low-cost permit parking to employees. So while I totally support the idea of having low-cost permit parking for employees, I think what you did not do, despite repeated requests from not just me, from a number of bike advocates in town, was look at the bicycle master plan that was prepared by, I'm blanking out.
Now WSP, but Parsons Brinckerhoff.
Yeah, Parsons Brinckerhoff, which identified certain streets which basically are needed as part of our bicycle network. And by the way, were adopted into our master plan last year with a lot of work. And to come in, with sort of recommendations that some of those streets that really should be considered seriously or dedicated to remove parking for good bicycle facilities. And by the way, the other thing that's interesting in your report is that while you talk about bicycle facilities in generic terms, in the report itself, you really only refer to bike parking. And I think that's the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's needed. I mean, bicyclists will always find a parking meter to chain their bike to if there's not bike parking, but they're not even going to get on their bicycle and ride into town if they don't feel safe doing it. So, I feel like there should be more in this report that references the actual implementation of dedicated, bike lanes. And by the way, that does, as you mentioned, help reduce demand for parking. And, it addresses other goals that you have in your study, but it's not explicit. And I think that, you've avoided addressing some of those hard questions of, either we disagree with Parsons Brinckerhoff and we think that, the parking here is too necessary to give up and just come out and say it, or say we can find another place for this particular parking need, and you need to recognize and address somehow.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and I know at the November meeting that was brought to our attention, and my understanding was we did look at that report, so I'll go back and make sure. I don't think I definitely wouldn't recommend the employee permit strategy in lieu of a bike lane, so I'll make sure that we're not conflicting with that. It was more in terms of you have all those meters, the demand doesn't actually look like it merits meters, but there are businesses along those streets, and I'm sure they use those spaces from time to time. And if you're going to keep the meters, I don't think the demand from those stores is enough, and that creates an opportunity. And to be honest with you, providing affordable parking for downtown employees is often one of the biggest challenges of these studies. And so that's why we looked at that in particular. But if it conflicts with an adopted recommendation for a dedicated bike lane, we'll definitely take a look at that, because we definitely wouldn't say that trumps a bike lane.
Okay.
Yeah, and we didn't mean to.
And this may be one of those questions that we really need to look at further as we go into the implementation, because Princeton does not have a history of removing parking to provide for any other mode of transportation. I mean, Hamilton is our perfect example of that. And that really has to be the first action of council, is to acknowledge that change is needed, to then go into the next step that you're asking about, identifying those locations in the parking study that can have the parking removed. But we also, it needs to be a public discussion about where does council want to remove parking. Another example is Witherspoon Street, where we have the parking spaces right near the crosswalk. That another place where parking should be removed. But I don't think historically there has been any action taken on things like that.
Yeah.
Mr. Lamed?
Yeah, thank you so much. Beautiful report. Mine is just one question. I know a lot of the hourly employees have been parking at like the YWCA and YMCA, and the Y doesn't like that, so they've been putting notes in their cars to move their cars. But I was wondering, did you ever consider in the study like an off-site parking spot, and then we'll have like a bus or a van bring the folks into town, like the employees?
For employees?
Yeah.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So we did look at, again, if, making sure that the freebie, right, is well utilized and understood. But the shared parking strategy is actually employees is often, that's a population that can be an easier ask of someone who has a private facility because it's a controlled population. Either a business association could be an intermediary, or it's a specific business like a Y. So I know I'm not opening up my lot to everybody. I'm opening it up to Y employees, and if there's a problem, I can talk to the Y. So we did call that out. It wasn't I didn't touch on it in the PowerPoint, but I believe we talked about that. And if not, Deanna can let me know, because that is a good place to start in terms of and it's distributing parking demand that's important, because employees do tend to park for quite a long time. So, thank you.
Ms. Howard?
Yes, thank you. Lance and I were both struck by your, I don't know what you call it, that chart you had at the beginning about all the steps you've gone through up till now, and it looks very impressive until you realize that just means now we have to go through that, right? I mean, that was just the study part of this, right? I don't want anybody to have the impression that this means this is over. This is just, that was your studies.
Yeah.
Process timeline, right?
Right.
So just a reminder for us. But I want to follow up on a comment and question that Jenny raised, something that she and I have been talking about offline. I've been trying to think about sort of being guided by two principles, especially when we talk about the residential changes that you're proposing. One is, first, do no harm. Nobody should be worse off after the changes we make. And two, fairness generally. Those are sort of the two principles I've been thinking about. And I'm wondering, in your work in other places, have you dealt with a municipality that made a transition like you're proposing, that went from not allowing overnight or permits to allowing them, and how you dealt with that transition? Because I think, as Jenny mentioned, and I'm sorry, I came in through part of it, so I'm not sure how much you said, but the reality is that many people in town have been paying for many, many years through increased property taxes for the parking they have on their own property. And what happens when you transition to people who've not had parking spots having parking spots? Are there revaluations for people's home ownership? What is that transition, and how do you manage that in a way that's fair? Because I didn't see that in the report. I mean, it's just like, oh, just do this. Well, that sounds easier said than done.
Yeah, so I will say the only place I've worked where they had a similar setup with an overnight parking ban and time limits during the day was Montclair. And the time limits were not really about reducing resident car ownership. It was near rail stations, so they just didn't want all those spaces taken up. So if they took away the 2-hour time limits, and honestly most of the streets were just empty, but if you took away the 2-hour time limit, they'd be full.
Filled with commuters, you mean?
Commuters,
people from
yeah,
Adeline.
exactly, pretty quickly. So it wasn't an explicit policy to try to reduce resident ownership, but some of the things we heard there were similar to what we heard here, including one young man came to a focus group and said, I would actually commute to my job by bus, but I own a car and I don't have off-street parking, and if I don't take my car with me to work, I'm stuck with time limits. And so it's obviously an anomaly, but ironically,
No, I've heard that. I mean, I've heard that from other people. I think that's not uncommon.
And so the fact that you have, correct me if I'm wrong, the one off-street lot that you have where if I don't have off-street parking but I have a car, I can get a permit there, there's a wait list. And so there's a real constraint. And so if you want to have an explicit policy about reducing vehicle ownership by making it hard to park on the street.
I don't think it's reducing, it's not increasing.
Not increasing, right, because you've had this for years. Yeah, I'm not trying to increase home or vehicle ownership. I will say, though, that from my part in terms of VMT, resident-owned vehicles in communities that are very walkable, transit accessible, mixed use, et cetera, those cars tend to be used a lot less often than if they move to the suburbs where they could get easier parking. And trends, again, are favoring, you may give me easy curbside parking in front of my house, but all these other mobility alternatives come with a lot less hassle and a lot less cost. I think personal vehicle ownership rates will be going down. We did give weight to a lot of the folks that came to our meetings and said, I need to have a car, and either the cost of what my options are or the restrictions are affecting my quality of life, and it was framed in equity issues, and so we put forward strategies to deal with it. And again, most of the time, if we can provide access to parking without building new infrastructure, most communities have supported that. This is a little bit different. I won't tell you what you should do. Again, it's just based on our balance of expertise, what we've seen elsewhere, and what we heard here.
But it sounds like you don't really have an apt comparison in terms of, I just think
No.
we need to think about it, and I know we're not taking action tonight. This could have a dramatic impact on property values, and I'm not even sure in which way.
And that was brought up, and I try to not pretend to know what I don't know, and I'm not
Right.
expert in property values, and
But we can't
it's a very
ignore it.
interesting concept. Absolutely. I
mean,
wouldn't
you
want to-
can.
Well, there's real data. Our tax assessor has real data on that. I mean, the tax assessor raises the valuation when there's a driveway, decreases it when there's not.
And I'm just thinking, when you do an improvement on your house, it's amazing how as soon as you get a certificate of occupancy, one area in which the municipality is incredibly efficient is in revaluing your house, right? I think. Is that true, Mark? Would that be something we'd have to anticipate doing too? Rethinking home values on many I don't
And
know.
the really difficult piece is somebody lives on a street where they now can get a permit, but they choose not to. Do you keep their assessment lower and you
No,
raise
because
it
it
for
will-
somebody who goes to get their permit?
No, I think it's the fact that you can get it that increases the value, not that you take it. Sounds like the mayor doesn't want us to go down this rabbit hole, but I'm just, I was anticipating the hook. I'm just putting a plug in, like, we have to think through these issues, and it sounds like maybe not, that's not for you to advise us on. That's going to be,
This is actually the first place, and we've worked in D.C. where they had a whole, I'm sure property values came up eventually, but this is the first place I've heard that brought in terms of how will that affect my
well, and it
property
does
value,
affect,
yeah.
because it affects our ability to function as a community, and it
Absolutely.
affects
Yep.
the who lives there, and, anyway, it's you haven't spent a lot of time in New Jersey then, if you haven't heard about property taxes.
I mean, we've done this in Metuchen, they had kind of more of a normal resident permit program system, but again, it had been there for years, so it was the status
Right,
quo.
I mean, that's where I'm stuck
Yeah.
with the do no harm, and the fairness is that we have to take into account sort of, not just, this is not what an ideal world is, it's how do we move from where we are.
Yeah, and I can actually circle back with Montclair, because we did make similar recommendations to them, and if they've acted on them, I can ask Janice Talley there.
That would be interesting to hear, because they're
if they've
often cited
addressed-
to us as a similar municipality,
Definitely.
even if bigger.
Yeah.
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 Thank you.
Mr. Creighton.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, I join my colleagues in applauding the breadth and length of this study and the process, and now we have some data points to make decisions. Since the last time you appeared in town, we've had maybe half a dozen or more retail establishments in the downtown area that have closed. You've given us an action plan matrix where you've identified immediate implementation. I know you're not an economist, and I'm guessing that you're not a specialist in retail, but what are among these items that are marked for immediate implementation in the timeline might stem that exodus of retail and or facilitate the conversion of retail to other uses, say restaurants?
Yeah, I'm not an expert. I'm definitely not an economist. I'm not an expert in retail, but I will say most of our parking studies, that's one of the primary stakeholders, is that walkable retail storefront. So always forefront in my mind in these studies. But so I think the shifting toward evening hours, which again you're ahead of the curve compared to most places, but pushing even further, making sure that all of your management tools are there, because most of those retail spaces aren't going to be refilled by more retail. They're going to be filled by food and beverage. And often the evening is their bread and butter. So making sure the management is there, making sure the coordinated information is there. So, if I'm comfortable parking in a Princeton facility in the evening and walking because it's beautiful, I know that it's there and it's free, right? Also the zoning, making sure that you don't stymie investment in something because based on, your zoning code, your individual ratios are in pretty decent shape, but most of those were built out of very suburban expectations 20, 30 years ago. And so stymieing investment in a potential food and beverage, reuse of that space based on, well, I couldn't find anywhere to put those 6 parking spaces, I think is a big deal. And again, getting something from the developer, and that's really where the in lieu fee comes from, is often cities are just given 2 options, either sticking to the code or waiving the parking requirements altogether and getting nothing. So at least the in lieu fee gives you something to work with, including maybe advertising those spaces, more remote parking spaces. So some of those are, and most all of those are low cost to revenue positive opportunities. So, and I think the new meters, which you're already moving forward with, will help.
I have a quick follow-up, I think, to Mr. Quinn. So when you showed us the slide of what communities charged for this in lieu of fee, they were sort of all over the map. And I know it's been quoted to us that at least the stacked parking spaces in a garage cost like $25,000 a space approximately. So
I would guess that's the basement of your real costs here. Yeah.
So is that what you charge? Because that seems like right now, I think that's probably about the cost of somebody having to go before the zoning board to get a variance.
Yeah.
And so I don't know.
Yeah,
it seems steep to me for one spot, but maybe that's what we should be charging. I just don't know how, what your recommendation is, how you factor the real cost into what the banked cost would be.
Right. There's a bit of art and science to it, I think. If you're a city where most of the time you're going to use that money to build parking, the sweet spot is really a little bit cheaper than the flat rate because you'll be able to build to scale. Either way, you're going to be able to build cheaper than the developer most of the time. So you want it to be enough to cover your costs, but a discount to the developer compared to building it themselves. But if you're not providing parking, probably it's still in the same range because you want it to be attractive, but you want to be honest with yourself in terms of making sure you get, most of the times these things go wrong by charging far too little, and that's why you do see them all over the range, $5,000 to $6,000 a space. you're stymieing what you could do with that pool, even if you're not building parking. More free transit, more bike share, cheaper bike share, better website, things you can do with that money.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Cohen, you had a question?
So I was talking about this study with some friends and mentioned the fact that while the study has all these great recommendations for how to change the parking fee structures and so on and so forth, there really was nothing in there about how you figure out what the bottom line cost or benefit is going to be. And the question is, how do other municipalities deal with it? I mean, do they just go out there and take a stab and then check years later and see if they lost a bunch of money or if they made a bunch of money? Or how do you prepare for that piece of the transition?
So I guess it wasn't in our scope really to look at the financial bottom line. I will say that if a system isn't breaking even, that's our first recommendation, is that you should be charging enough to pay so that parking pays for itself. Most of the clients we work for make at least some money on parking, and then we usually talk about what do you do with that? Do you control it,
You
or
may
does it go
make
to the
more
city?
after implementing your recommendations than they made before they implemented
Yeah,
them.
I mean, we don't usually focus on that. We usually don't. Our pricing recommendations aren't about making money. If it's a dynamic, vital downtown, they will. But we really try to emphasize that's not the primary intent. It's managing access to the limited resource.
Mhm.
So often we try not to emphasize, gee, you're going to make $2 million, more than you did last year. We have done that when that's been vital, but that wasn't part of the ask here.
So you feel the risk is not great. You go ahead, you implement the recommendations based on the benefits to managing your parking needs, and then you find out how much you made, and you set up your benefit programs or those other pieces of the recommendations once you know how much more you're bringing in.
Yeah. So the one capital intensive recommendation that I know is on the short-term implementation is the meters purchase, which kind of moved forward already, so we didn't really need to cost that out in any detail. Most of our pricing strategies tend to be revenue positive, so not much risk there. But we did try to touch on cost in the action plan matrix. So usually that's how we test out which of these seem kind of risky to you, and maybe we need to do a deeper dive into terms of whether it's worth it or not. I don't know, did you have any recommendation in particular that seemed questionable in terms of cost benefit?
Well, no, I guess, the license plate recognition technology was a little bit of a black hole in terms of how much it would actually cost and what.
Yeah, so I think we did provide some details on that. I think the vehicles are like $50,000 to $60,000, which it's easy for me to say you should go ahead and do that, but that does provide an awful lot of parking data where you don't have to replicate that task through a consultant to do that. If you want to move into an environment of monitoring performance in terms of availability, that pays off pretty well. And I will say it's not my area, but I know that in terms of scofflaws and things like that, the other things that license plate recognition does pick up, a lot of cities have found that's been their justification for buying that. So I actually asked Deanna if they're moving toward that anyway. Usually parking often doesn't turn that conversation, but if that conversation is being had already, we can add to it and say, here are the other areas of value you'll get from that.
And I'm sorry for taking so.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we have time to hear from the public. And why don't we just take unless you have a follow-up to that, I'd like to hear from the public. Okay.
So the last question about is that I know that one of the goals, at least as expressed, I guess, in the November presentation, is that, if you make some of these changes where you charge more for parking longer and so on, you actually can eliminate parking tickets. And so that seems like a big potential revenue loss. And is that something that's been looked at when you implement all this? You know, you may bring in a lot more in terms of your revenue from the meters and
Right.
such, but you may lose by not giving out tickets.
Yeah.
Tom, I'll just jump in
sure.
on that one. That is one of the things that staff is considering as we go forward, because it is quite an ambitious program to go from where we are currently to full implementation of this study. And so those are pieces that staff are considering and looking at the best ways to gather that data and put it together in a package that our residents and council members can understand and process and make those informed decisions.
Have other towns done that already?
So interestingly, we did a follow-up study in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where our client is the DDA, which is a Downtown Development Authority. It's a quasi-public entity, and they manage the parking, and they invest in a lot of mobility, and they're in a position where they see the bigger picture, where parking compliance creates a value-added environment for their constituents, which is the downtown businesses. So they may lose ticket revenue, but they'll gain, and they can take the bigger picture. Unfortunately, enforcement was with the police department, and that losing that revenue is just loss to them. So they're trying to negotiate with the police department, you know, how do we make you whole if we take over enforcement? So it's a real issue, but it's different in every city.
Okay.
And I don't see you getting to a zero violation environment anytime soon, but I do think compliance is a performance measure that you want to pursue from a management perspective anyway.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I'd like to open it up. If there's anybody from the public who'd like to make a comment. You have people signed in, but since you're at the mic, why don't you start? And then after Nat, I want to just call up Peter, Madison, and Ira to come up. And you just come up because I just want to make sure we can hear from everybody who wants to speak, and it just allows us to hear from more people quickly if people come on up who want to speak.
All right, my name is Nat Boddigheimer, a resident of Princeton, White Pine Lane. A couple of things that will echo comments that have already been made. First, just to acknowledge this is not a parking problem as much as it is an access to and business viability and neighborhood protection, and to a certain extent sustainability a problem, and that was referred to in the consultant report as well as many of your comments. I think one important point is that a lot of the tools that are available to address the different problems that have, or different issues that have been identified don't really have a natural home in any particular department of the municipality, and that's going to be a substantial implementation challenge for you to grapple with. I mean, there's the police enforcement issues, there are planning issues that are going to have to do with the redevelopment and zoning, the revenue forecasting issues, there are engineering questions, and I've been thinking about how it would be housed in a municipal department, and negotiation of shared parking agreements with private property owners is going to be something that falls on the administrative side of the house, involving council. I just think that how all of these things are going to work together within the municipality needs to be given careful thought, and there are models for how to handle that. It can be handled municipally, it can be handled with a parking authority, it can be handled with other approaches, but I mean, I think that you want to make sure that you're making sure that there's leadership across the board on all of these interrelated elements. I think it's really critical as part of that stakeholders from all the different affected perspectives are included in the process for coming up with a solution. It's merchants, landlords, residents, and residents who are advocates for sustainability, biking and walking. And just to also acknowledge that some of the changes, as have been alluded to in a number of council members' comments, are going to be tricky, forecasting the revenues that are going to be generated by a new fee collection system. There's no basis that you can pivot off of. So there's going to be a little bit of a stepping into the void, and there's going to be a lot of what is sort of the professional art of this work, and a little bit of faith-based action, I would say. That we're not making this about pure economics. We're thinking about taking steps to improve the town, and then you can rejigger it as you go. A couple other points, but that's my 3 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening. Peter Madison. I live at 645 Snowden Lane for the last 38 years. I served on the planning board for 13 years. I have read the report completely. I have submitted comments prior to the report being made to both the firm and to Ms. Stockton. Until recently, I was managing, I did a career change. For the past 5 years, I've worked managing the building at 20 Nassau Street, which is an office and retail building. We have 14 stores in that building. It has been very challenging on the retail part of it. As you know, there's about a dozen vacant storefronts downtown. And some people will write letters to the town topic saying it's those greedy landlords that are raising the rents. Well, we actually had to lower rents for some of our longtime stores because their margins were so thin that if we didn't lower their rents, they were gone and more vacant storefronts. So it's not just a matter of greedy landlords raising prices. During that time that I was managing that building, I was also a member of the Princeton Merchants Association and took an active role in that. And I can tell you that the Merchants Association is very concerned about this whole parking issue. I'm sure many of you have already shopped on the internet, if not all of us, so we understand what's happening with the retail business. Retail experts and investors are predicting that the future of downtown is going to be entertainment, dining, and services. And those are items that zoning now restricts heavily. Services, you need a variance for a service. A restaurant, you need a variance for that if it's not already a restaurant. But that is going to be the life of the downtowns. So, to promote a vibrant downtown, what we need to do is look at the zoning and change it. Get rid of all these ridiculous parking requirements for service and other uses. And now we get to parking. Page 39 of the report specifically states that 45% of residents, or the respondents, mostly residents, do not shop downtown because it's expensive, and 61% said they don't shop downtown because it's inconvenient. So those are serious issues that are driving the demise of the retail market downtown. We also know in that report, though, that there's parking spaces available. Well, let me give you an example I've seen, and this is from an employee standpoint. You can drive, if you go beyond Bayard Lane, or you go down John Street during the middle of the day, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, there's lots of vacant spaces. And why is that? Because there's a 2-hour limit. So all those employees who could park nearby, maybe with a modest fee or free, have to park instead in spaces downtown that are spaces that shoppers could be using. So, the report is very comprehensive, and I applaud you on that, but I can also tell you that it's somewhat generic. I'll speed this up. My recommendation, and based on the questions that you have, is that we need to appoint a committee to review this report and come up, and that committee should be made up of stakeholders. One person from each of the 3 surrounding residential areas, 3 people from the Princeton Merchants Association, our zoning officer, Ms. Stockton or one of her delegates, somebody from the university, and somebody from the bike committee. But to just enact ordinances based on what this person has indicated and their study indicates is not addressing or is not going to address and make anybody really happy. So anyhow, such a committee will probably come up with recommendations that are beneficial to all, but in essence, there'll always be some people who won't be happy with it. So that's part of politics. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I really encourage you to pursue this idea of a committee, because otherwise there are going to be a lot of people who are not going to be happy with something that's passed without input.
Thank you. Ira?
I didn't realize that the study group was going to be presented tonight. I went to the meeting in December, and in fact, my problems and solutions are both contained in the report. But since you've robbed me of the chance to rant and rave, I think if I tell my story, it might be constructive, because it does at least tangentially touch upon issues raised by Ms. Cullimer, Ms. Howard, and Mr. Cohen. I've rented or owned in the township and borough since 1995, and a little less than 2 years ago, I moved to Murray Place. That's within the study area. In fact, it's between Aiken and Nassau. And the property did not have on-site parking, and it said that the listing said that I could get a permit. I went to get the permit. I understood this, and I was told you could have the permit provided that it didn't violate any zoning ordinances. Turned out I went through a catch-22 and found out there was a zoning ordinance that I couldn't have, and I said, what am I supposed to do? At which point the township manager came in and solved the problem. He said, we're going to override this because this doesn't make sense. Fine. I then went to the realtor and I said, you know, I got a ticket within the next day for parking within the 2 hours, because I assumed, well, my permit, and somewhat naively, would cover me, and it didn't. And the realtor didn't want to take responsibility, and so I took some other steps. I went to the Better Business Bureau. Then I went to the New Jersey Department of Banking and Insurance, Consumer Inquiry and Research Center. A lot of time, but my main thought was to at least have them take some responsibility for this. I sort of heard that this goes on a lot, that realtors are part of the problem too. Eventually a settlement was reached with a non-disclosure agreement. Does that say that anybody took responsibility? Probably not. In the course of the last year, I've gotten now, last calendar year, I got 4 tickets because parked on the street. When I talked to a parking enforcement officer, at one point he said, well, we don't do it all the time. Sometimes the university, around P-RAID says, could you enforce it a little more? Fine. So most of the time I did not get tickets. 2 of the 4 times that I got tickets, I actually was sick, so I didn't go out that day. I looked around within a 16 square block area. I am the only property that doesn't have a place to park. Every place else has parking on site. So my initial idea of coming here tonight was simply say, would you please give me a 24/7 on-street parking? And that's actually what I would like. But I think this sort of complicated story, it's both unique in that I live in a section of town where most people have off-street parking, but yet the sort of hurdles and that I had and holes I had to jump through, and ordinances that are there, which probably have to be re-examined. And the question when I first talked with Heather about this was, well, this ordinances probably should be made in order to solve a problem. And I said, what problem is being solved by saying that I can't park in front of the house where I live when I don't have an alternative? And it was that's sort of simple, and that's probably should be the guidance as you go on. The property values has come up among the people, and my house was on the market for a year beforehand and didn't sell and sold lower because there wasn't parking. That was the elephant in the living room that nobody talked about, I discovered afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? Come on up, please. And since you didn't sign up ahead of time, you just make sure, please come up and just state your name and speak slowly so it can be recorded correctly in the minutes.
My name is Stephen Griffiths. I've lived at Maple Street for 18 years. I have no off-street parking, and I've been happy with that situation for most of that time. We have 1 car in my family. I ride my bicycle to work for 25 years. I've been doing that. I do research on climate change. I know what global warming is. I know that lowering our footprint is a mandate of my family's. The issue that I have been living with in the last few years with the family is my wife is a medical doctor, and we sometimes need to use the car in the daytime to go to work or to go to school. And coming back home, it's not possible to park on my street, on Maple Street, during the daytime because the street is filled with parking. It's one of the few free street parkings in town. I think I've been a squeaky wheel, as have others on my street, for this particular issue. And the issue of the taxes and the assessments is something that I hadn't thought about, to be quite honest. I think it's an interesting perspective. I don't know how to respond to that, to be frank. I don't know if there's any precedent for allowing for a daytime permit to be given to an a house without off-street parking to immediately raise the assessment of that house, to increase the value of it. I kind of see the assessment of my property to be really abnormally low because it's a difficult place to live when you don't have off-street parking in the middle of the day. And additionally, I frequent the businesses on Nassau Street where I live quite a lot. I work off Route 1. I have a laboratory where I work at, and none of my colleagues come in town to go to lunch because they know they cannot get any parking. And on my street in particular, there's a number of restaurants around the corner, and if there was a 2-hour limit for parking in the daytime, there would be turnover. And so the businesses, I think, would be more satisfied by that. The residents would be more satisfied by that because people could come in and go, and yes, they're using their car, but we walk too. So I think everybody who admits that they want to try to reduce their carbon footprint and reduce the cars in town, we need to at least allow for some mode of transportation. Electric cars are coming on, so cars are not going to go away, and the inability to park in the daytime is my issue. And increasing the number of permits, I'm not asking for that. I just want to have a permit in the daytime so I can park. And I know a number of other people on my street, and I believe the gentleman on Murray Street also has a similar situation. So please keep that in mind. I appreciate the concern you have for the assessments, and think through those issues. But if your conclusion is don't change anything, that's going to be a problem for a number of people. And it's a serious problem. There's a number of students from the university. I teach in the university. I know these students. They park on the free spots, and they leave their cars for 12, 13 hours during the daytime because it's free parking. That takes away from the residents and the businesses, and it's a problem.
Thank you.
Good evening. Frank Smith. A lot of you know me as Dean. Oops, sorry. I live on McLean Street, also own a business in town, Shazam's the toy store, in Palmer Square. So I want to address this on two levels. I think that I've read the entire report end to end, and some parts of it more thoroughly than others. But the assessment in terms of downtown, I think, is very wise. And I think that employee parking is a real difficult one to overcome. And what we have right now is a situation where employees are either forced to walk a great distance for free parking, or they pay a disproportionate amount of their hourly pay to park close to work. And neither one of those is really an adequate solution to the issues that we're facing. And so what happens is that employees are losing a lot of their hourly pay. Our customers aren't able to get into the stores. And a reasonable solution is providing employee parking permits at, I would say, at a nominal fee for areas that are underutilized currently. I just think that's a smart solution, and one that provides fairness for everyone, the businesses, the employees, the residents of the community. I also live in the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood, so I want to address that as well on this issue of fairness. I have neighbors next door. There's 3 adults that live next to me. All of them work. They have 1 parking space. They all work in different places. And their life is just nothing but juggling vehicles, day and night, day and night, day and night. My mother technically has a parking space at her house. She lives 2 doors away from me. But if she parks in that parking space, her car sticks out a little bit onto the sidewalk, and we've heard all of the commotion about that. that's been brought to council, that people are parking in the right of way for pedestrians. And so that comes up significantly in our neighborhood, where people are trying to park their vehicle, but they're blocking pedestrians. And so I think that there's an essence of fairness that has to be understood when people are living in these situations where they have inadequate parking, and they just need a space. And so I think it behooves us to address that situation for those that don't have it, and especially in the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood. The essence of fairness, I think, goes to allowing folks that have been marginalized for a great portion of this town's history to actually get a little bit of something, just having the ability to park a vehicle without having to wait 2-3 years oftentimes for a permit. That is unfair to me. So I'll just leave that there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, whoa, sorry about that. Good evening, everybody. I'm Kevin Wilkes. In December 3rd, Princeton Futures staged a public meeting at the library where we analyzed the report and discussed it, invited the public to come in and comment on it. So we had a slightly different audience than you have here tonight. There was a lot of interest in the community about the potential benefits of the report. I would urge you to think about two large lessons that come out of this study, which are important for you as managers of our community resources. The most important one, I believe, is that we don't lack for parking spaces. We lack for a sophisticated strategy to manage them. So at the two peak times of the week when we use parking in the community, midday on Thursday and Saturday evening, our capacity, we use about 60% of available spaces, correct? So, yet, if you drive down Witherspoon or Nassau, the spaces are full and you think, wow, there's no place to park. So the second lesson that's important that comes out of this report is that there are sophisticated systems to manage this asset which we could take advantage of. We started for years with quarters. 2004, we advanced to the smart card. That was a step forward because you got to get the money refunded that you didn't use. But we are stuck with that. Now down at the train station, you can actually put in marker space. So bit by bit, we've crawled to advanced strategies. But today, you can have meters that tell you if the space is occupied, that allow dynamic pricing, allow you to monitor and adjust pricing based on demand conditions that the Nelson Nygaard suggested. So without getting into the weeds of should we charge $30 for a permit, should we charge $15, should we have one on street or two, just think the most important first step you can take is to create, as both Nat and Peter suggest, a system that brings everyone in the community together to find a way to start to implement this that's fair and equitable to everybody. And then, when you purchase these meters this year, try to get the most sophisticated ones you can that will be adaptable down the road and have the ability to be upgraded and changed without losing all the hardware and throwing the whole meter head out and having to start over in another 10 years. And imagine that we can together work to figure out the details. So the report suggests some details, but really what's important is for us to think of a way to manage this asset better. You made in 2016 $4,300,000, $4,350,000 on your parking assets that came into the municipal coffers. So you're not starting from scratch. Between your parking garage, permits, pilots, that's the money you bring in. So you've got the ability, you've got cash coming in, you've got a good report. There was a lot of interest in the room at the library on December 3rd by the merchants and by residents in an equitable system. I trust that you can all figure out with staff and the community how to make the system equitable, but think now first about how to invest in the infrastructure, the hardware, and the software so we can start to pull this off. Thanks.
Is there anybody else who'd like to comment? Okay, great. All right, so we'll bring it back to council, and I know that the first phase of this is the smart meters and figuring out what the regulations are going to be associated with those. So I want to turn it over to Deanna just to sort of walk through next steps.
Well, and maybe let us know about the meters that you're looking at, because I think people would like to hear I think they're doing some of the things people are asking for.
So we are looking at smart meters. They are manufactured by IPS, and they are meters that accept credit cards and coin. They can be, of course, with any of the new technology, you get the base model and then you can evaluate upgrades to that base model. And so we are just really at the beginning process of working with IPS to look what the upgrades are, to what makes sense from the cost benefit standpoint for implementation in Princeton, as well as looking at initial implementation and then steps that go beyond that initial phase. For example, there's sensors that you can purchase that are an add-on to the meter. Do you want to implement those first? Do you want to wait and see how the initial rollout of meters are? So those are the pieces that we are looking at currently. IPS is a product that is available through state contract or cooperative, so we don't have to go out to bid for it. And it's an easier process to roll out. We're tentatively looking at a time frame of late summer, early fall for the rollout of the new meters. It's amazing. They say they can replace 300 meters a day, so full implementation of the meters could be within 1 business week. But it gets into the nitty-gritty and the nuts and bolts of those questions that all of you on the dais raised, as well as the residents here tonight. How far do we want to go to take this implementation and the change? Do you want to look at where you're rolling it out so it's progressive rates, dynamic pricing, and you get away from the violations? You've got the staffing issues to deal with. You've got all these other pieces to talk about. Currently, parking is covered under, they're actually housed under Public Works. Engineering comes into effect because we are the technical resource that helps with a lot of these contracting and implementation. Violations falls under police. So as you did here, we do have multiple entities that are working through this process, which actually can be a good thing as well, because we come at it with different perspectives. But it's something we're working with administration on how to move forward, and do we look at putting together those stakeholder groups. So I think what we'll do next is go back with administration, Public Works, and look through the process. We've got some ideas of how to move forward. Some of it, I think, we'll be meeting with council members as well in small groups to get more feedback from you after what we've heard tonight. But tentatively, we're looking at coming back at the second meeting in February. We'll have to see, because of the meeting with the university president, if that's the best fit for us. But at that time, I think, is a good point to be able to roll out more answers to the questions that were raised tonight and as to the process forward. But the good news, at least from the infrastructure standpoint, is that it's easily accessible for us to get the new smart meters and roll them out. It's just that bigger overarching question of how do we make it equitable and fair and move forward in the best interests of our residents. And that's where we'll be looking for guidance on that process.
Yeah, I had a couple questions that I never actually asked from the presentation that I just wanted to ask while you're here. So you talked about this 85% as the goal for capacity.
Yep.
And how often do you measure that? Like, let's say we start off with the rates that you're recommending. Is it seasonally different? I mean, do you wait a whole year? Do you look after 3 months whether it's working and whether you need to make adjustments? And how often are you switching things around?
I think you can approach it different ways. Particularly, you can set a period of like a year where you make more frequent adjustments, like maybe quarterly. But then after you sort of get comfortable with the basic framework and tiers and where they're applied, annual for this size of a city seems suitable. It's not San Francisco, where you're constantly going to get things down to the nitty-gritty. You just want to create a predictable environment. In terms of measurement, I mean, that's hard to say. I think if you have any kind of automated collection like sensors or license plate reader data, you can look at that data, daily and get really clear pictures. In fact, there are vendors out there. I know one called Smarking that will help manage that data, and you just get pictures all the time of the demand flows, and you can see how it varies from day to day. If it's boots on the street, honestly, a lot of folks just don't end up doing it. Even places that have put it in their ordinance that they're going to do it monthly, it doesn't happen. So it's easy for me to say do it every month if it's people actually counting, at least for a year. If you can do it, that'd be great. So sort of get the framework started. We did outline a sort of a generic approach to how you might do that, but that should be tweaked for every community, I think, based on, again, what resources they have.
Mm-hmm. And then you had talked about this idea of a benefit district,
Mm-hmm.
which I think has a lot of appeal to it. And normally, like, what's the size of a benefit district? Would it be a neighborhood? Would it be the whole entire, everybody who has parking restrictions? Or
usually a downtown of this size would be one district, and then a neighborhood might be a different district. I could go back and look at Aspen to see how neatly they parcel the different neighborhoods that might have opted into that, or Austin. Here it's pretty small, so it might be even street by street. I think one of the things that holds that back is it's hard to picture that amounting to a whole lot of money in terms of if the benefit is the appeal to getting residents to buy into that. So it might be some scale barriers here for that to be designated to a specific street or neighborhood. But I think the key is, the district for the downtown is that, as I think the last gentleman spoke to, it's the fees, it's the fines, it's the in lieu fees as well, so that you do end up with a really meaningful pot of money, and that there's a mission behind how that money is spent, so that it doesn't just sort of bleed away. To me, that's more important. I would say for the commercial district, that's the key thing. Whether that's an enticement for the neighborhood strategies or not, I'm less sure about.
yeah, Ms. Carmella?
Well, I just wanted to say I was curious about that too, and I did look at some of the places and I didn't see any small benefits districts. They were all bigger than ours. I mean, I think we would, according to what I Googled, and I really couldn't find anything that was smaller than our town for one of those.
Parking Benefit District is kind of a brand or a moniker, but really the heart of it is an enterprise fund. And the latitude to spend things like in lieu fee money on things other than parking. That can be a parking benefit district that's not really called as such. It's really the ability to capture those monies and to be able to spend it wisely on parking and mobility.
Okay, thank you. Maybe some last comments here, because
Okay.
we have to talk about the 2018 budget, too.
Okay. I just had a really quick question about the 30-minute parking, because I was curious. It seemed like you didn't think 30-minute parking was a good idea, and I'm just really curious about that, because to me it seems like a good idea. So I wanted to know what, because you can run into like Small World or Olives or, those places on Witherspoon seem to be...
Right. Well, I think in the report we left some room for that as needed. I don't like it as generally a default. Often it's catered to a specific business, and if you want to have very short-term time limits, you can have it like on maybe corners. What I've seen before is it's catered to a business, and then that business goes away, and regulations tend to lag in terms of turning over. And I don't know if you mentioned this, but the meters that you are looking at have a 15-minute grace period, which captures a lot of that. But I'm not particularly against it. I think we're just pushing generally in the direction of 2 hours, kind of the clean default for short-term parking. Yeah.
Did you have a last comment?
Just in terms of the benefit district, I think that the way I see this, I think the neighborhoods, these are going to be major upgrades to the permit system if we follow the recommendations, and the benefits to neighborhoods of having parking spaces available when they need them is going to be enough of a compensation for the nominal costs of the permit system being implemented. I think that the center is really the area where the benefits are going to be needed. Things like supporting more dinky routes and more buses, that would really allow employees to park remotely and to be able to get conveniently to their jobs and stuff like that.
Great.
Okay, all right. So I think we want to thank you for coming in for the report, and we're going to bring this back for now. Let's plan on February 26th, and in the meantime, I think we can all chew through the report some more, and I encourage folks in the community to come back on the 26th, look online for the agenda, and we'll be continuing the conversation. The plan is for the first phase of this is to work on the smart meters and the regulations related to the smart meters. The street permits are another really important piece to this. They're going to be more complicated because there are competing interests and limited space, and so we want to have that ongoing conversation about that, but we're probably not going to dig into actually the ordinances for those until after we've established the meters and the policies regarding the meters. So that's going to be a phase 2, but we want to keep talking about it and not surprise anybody, because we want everybody to be part of the conversation. For the 30,000 residents we have, there's probably 30,001 opinions about how we should do this right. And so we don't want to do anything where we have a process where people feel like they didn't know what was going on. So there's going to be more meetings. Tell people about it. I'm surprised we didn't have people out in the hallways tonight, but it was good. I'm glad we got to hear from everybody who wanted to speak tonight, and to be continued. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mayor. If it's possible, I would like to know if council could amend the agenda. I do have a consultant for the energy resolution.
Oh, okay.
And if we could amend the agenda to take care of that.
Yes, we will.
So moved.
And just to be clear, we're moving up Resolution 1847 to take that up next. It's been moved by Ms. Howard and seconded by Mr. Quinn. All in favor of amending the agenda?
Aye.
Thank you for being patient. Did you want to introduce it, Mark? Okay.
Actually, what I'll do is I'm going to get Prince. She's here in case there's any questions. Basically, you have before you a resolution to award a contract to provide energy consulting services to Transparent Energy to provide a online energy audit and some affiliated services for the municipality. What the consultant will do is provide consultant services for energy, purchasing energy through a number of suppliers. They will conduct an online audit, online auction for the municipality, and also monitor that process. They do have the ability to, one of the things that was important is to look at green energy. They have the ability to run a number of auctions with different percentages of green energy for us, and they can do that on the auction day. And if there's any questions, we'll see if we can answer those.
I know the last time that we looked into energy aggregation for the town, I mean, I just made a little, I was exploring that with some consultants, and it turned out that the market was not good at that time. And I just want to make sure, and then we spent some money looking into a project recently, and it turned out that we got no bidders. So I just want to make sure that we think that there's a likelihood that we'll get bids and that it will end up being a good deal.
Actually, in doing some research with a number of other companies, they did do an initial evaluation. Again, this was done a couple of months ago. It did initially show that there would be some savings. Again, it's all pegged to the market, so we don't know what's good about the energy auction. They can do the auction. If it's not beneficial to us, we don't have to accept it, nor is it a cost to us. So this is a service that we can do until we find there is a time where it does create a cost savings for us.
Perfect. So I make a motion that we accept the resolution.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Liverman and seconded by Ms. Howard. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Thank you. We look forward to working with you. All right, and now I'd like to turn it back over to Mr. Shashield again for our municipal budget update for 2018. And while Mark is bringing this up, just want to remind everybody, this is the opening discussion on the budget, but there'll be several meetings about this over the course of the next couple months, and also opportunities to meet in small groups with Mark and Sandy Webb about any questions folks might have.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. What I'll be presenting to Council this evening is a high-level overview of the 2018 budget. The initial planning of this budget began in the summer of 2017 and was presented first to Council in September of 2015 in terms of the 5-year forecast, which we've been doing on a regular basis. Using the 5-year forecast really provides us some insight on what the financial conditions are, what are the trends that we anticipate that will affect the financial position over the next 5 years, and is very important for us in developing our budget for the year, each year. As we went through that process, we recognize there are a couple significant revenue items that will be decreasing this year, actually over the last couple of years. That includes that reserve for debt service, which was at $1.4 million 2 years ago. Those funds have depleted, and that's something that we've been working on to deal with those issues. We've developed a plan to kind of ease our way into that over the last couple of years, and you'll see that as I go through the budget and reflected in the budget. This overview of the is a preliminary budget. And again, these numbers will change as we go through the budget process. One of the other things that you'll notice in the budget from the expenditure side of the budget is we identified through our 5-year forecast that there will be a spike in debt service this year. We understood that was coming. It is because we had a bond sale last year. This is anticipation of In 2019, we'll see significant reduction in our debt service. This new bond sale, that money the new sale of bonds is actually going to lead into that, and we knew that was happening when we did that. What we're proposing moving forward in terms of the budget work session will be on February 12th, will be initial budget work session with council, mayor and council. At that time, council will have the full detailed budget books listing out all the detailed budgets at that time, and will give us an opportunity to first go through some with significant detail of the budget. One of the things that we're doing at this point, because the budget, the financial books do not close until the end of February, when we're able to put together our financial statements. Some of the revenue items may change as we get our real numbers, and some of the expenditure items may also be adjusted. So once we do the February 12th, we'll have that work session. After that work session, we're proposing on February 21st, then to have, it's a morning meeting, one of the extra meetings, to have an open finance meeting in which we'll go through, again, in detail the budget, to have additional discussion on the budget. Finally, will be the actual introduction of the budget on February 26th. And again, it's important to note that the introduction of the budget is not the end of the process. It is actually the first time the budget is then presented to the public as a full budget. They will then establish a public hearing, which will be conducted sometime in April, the beginning of April, where we'll have the public hearing for the public to come in. During this whole period of time, council will continue to discuss the budget, making adjustments during that period of time. And we expect then a final adoption in April of this year. So let's get into really the heart of what we wanted to talk about this evening, and that's let's look at the expenditure side of the budget. You'll see before you is an overview, a summary of the salary and wages, 2018 and 2017. One of the things that you'll notice, you'll see that there is a decrease in salary and wages this year of roughly $460,000. This is a direct result of some decisions made by council to reorganize, do some reorganization, particularly in the 911 dispatch area. As you can see on the Teamsters Union, which were our dispatchers, there's a reduction of $758,000. And that is with the reduction of that staff in that department. And so you'll see that here, there.
I just have a quick question on that, though, but we're going to see an increase
You
somewhere
will
else.
see later where the changes in the other expenses. So to answer your question, if you go to the next slide, we're talking about other expenses. The other expenses are all of our departmental expenditures, kind of operating expenses that are not separately listed here in this summary. And as you can see, from 2017 to 2018, there's a $927,000 increase in the budget for other expenses. What's important to note there, $795,000 of that is the contract for the dispatch services that was moved, in essence, from salary and wages to the other expenses. So as you can see, there really is only about $120,000 of additional expenses and other expenses. One thing we've worked very hard for a number of years of really trying to control those other expenses. So you'll see that reflected there. This is one area that we'll continue to look at in terms of creating additional reductions in the budget.
Mark, there's fairly significant increase in the accumulated leave number as a percentage. Can you explain that?
If you want to talk about that right now, and actually the accumulated leave is basically for any employees that either retirement, some of our layoffs. This is an estimate, and this is an area where we may be able to receive some savings here as we do additional analysis on our accumulated leave. So there may be some adjustments here. This is based on what we anticipate people either retiring and some of the funds that we're paying out also to the people that have been laid off as a result of the dispatch. And again, this may be an area where I can see some reductions in that area. One of the things which is unusual usually insurance, in particular group insurance and health benefits insurance, it's usually our drivers in the budget. This year you'll see a reduction in that comes for two. The decision made with the dispatch is one of the reasons why you're seeing the reduction there. In addition to that, we've been receiving very favorable renewals from New Jersey State Health Benefits Program, which have been flat. And again, under the health benefits program, there may be some additional savings there. We're still going through very finely those health benefits, and we may be able to achieve additional savings under the health benefits program. Oops, too far. Again, as we talk each year, one of the biggest drivers are our pension programs. And you see the PERS and PFRS programs, over $100,000 of increases in those pension programs this year. They continue to be a driver in our budget every year. And again, probably the biggest drivers that you'll see in terms of one of the biggest drivers you'll see in terms of the increases in our budget this year. The real big increase in the budget this year comes here on this next page when we look at our debt service. As I talked about before, in looking at the 5-year forecast, one of the things, we just had a bond sale. As a result of the bond sales, there's a significant increase in debt service for this year, but there will be a corresponding decrease starting in 2019 in debt service. But we do have a spike in these first 2 years of the bonds. So you'll see $850,000 increase in the bond sale. This is one area where I think we will be able to reduce the impact of this. One of the things, as part of our debt policy each year, we have a line item in the revenue that you'll see is called the capital reserve. Part of the debt policy says that we should use our capital reserve to reduce the impact of any debt service increase, to limit it to about 1.5% increase each year. We've programmed this out previously and kind of projected it, so we may be able to do some of that and kind of reduce the impact of this $850,000 a year. The next big item that you'll see is the special emergency. That's basically the money we had to raise for consolidation. It ended last year. So we're actually seeing a reduction of about $483,000. However, there is one issue that has come up, and we talked about this when we did the 5-year plan. Each year, if you look at the line item that talks about deferred charges, that's $700,000 that's there. $200,000 is the $200,000 that we've set aside for cash capital each year. The additional $500,000 is for old capital items that cannot be bonded at this time, and it will require us to raise cash to pay those capital items. Those items were initially about $4 million. We're able to kind of reduce that down. We now have about $1.5 million that we need to pay for over the next couple of years, and with the reduction in the special emergency, this is an opportunity for us to pay that down each year. So that's why you see the additional $500,000. However, this is one area where we can have some conversation about what is the right number we should be paying down. We're proposing that we do use the same amount that's in the budget, but there can be some discussion about what that amount should be. Here's the question.
I just didn't really understand, I have to admit, that at all. I don't know. What did you say about consolidation and the money that we...
Consolidation.
This is I can just explain.
Okay.
This is the transition costs. So remember, we amortized the transition costs over 5 years, and we're done with that. And so this is the money that was paying for those costs of the new IT and the moving of departments and the code consolidation and all of that. And so now we don't have to pay for that money that
Since we're done consolidating the code, you mean?
Well, this was the part that we allocated as a special emergency.
So So we had to raise a part of that over 5 years. So that's now going away. What we're proposing to use that money to now pay for those capital items that we cannot bond for at this point, that we'll have to pay cash for.
Okay, that's what I didn't understand. What are the capital items that we cannot bond for?
Okay, there were over, in reviewing our capital authorizations over the last, since probably about 2000, we noticed there are a number of items, older items, that were funded but not bonded for. And at this time, because of the age of those, it's no longer available to be bonded. We have to just amortize it through cash.
And why did that, I mean, that didn't happen on purpose, or?
It did not happen on purpose. It was an error
Okay.
that happened in the past that we're correcting at
Okay.
this point.
And I know we had a discussion about this earlier, where you explained this to me too, because I was confused by it too. But given that we've gone since 2000 without doing this, where it's, I mean, what's the cost to not fixing this, or fixing it over a longer period of time where there's going to be less of a financial impact?
That's two things. One, you have to fix it. Eventually, it will be an audit problem for you. So we have to fulfill this obligation. The question of over what period of time, I think there is some flexibility, some conversations we can have with council about what's the right amount to allocate over time to pay these down. That's a discussion I think that we will have as we go through this budget process, and whether we will do the full 500,000 or is it a smaller portion of that. So as you see, as a total, in terms of the expenditures side of the budget, and this does not include grants. I always pull grants out because they don't have any impact on our budget, because they're revenue and expenditure neutral. The expenditure side of the budget is up $1.2 million. Next thing I wanted to do is let's look at our revenues. One of the things that was identified in our 5-year forecast is we really do not have a lot of growth in our local revenues. These are fees, permits, things, etc. And as you can see in this year's budget, again, not much growth, about $130,000 in growth, most of that coming from the university. This has been very stable. In fact, over the last couple of years, we've seen some reduction of this. We brought it back kind of in line. I don't expect to see a whole lot of growth here. And this is one of the issues that we'll have to deal with. I do not expect a lot of growth in these, but just really maintain the local revenues around this area. And again, as we go through the budget, there may be some small tweaks in there, but no, I don't see any major changes in this area.
Oh, Mark. Did we get money from, I mean, are we going to see in our budget the money from people prepaying, or is that anywhere?
No, it would only, they collect the money and it just gets applied to their taxes at the time it's applied. So it's put in a reserve, and so when it's time to pay, it just gets paid.
No, I understand
The only thing that we'll see in the budget potentially would be any interest that we earn from holding.
Well, that's
that
what
money.
I was wondering about, because there's a significant amount of money. I would, even like 1% interest would be like $200,000, right? Because wasn't it 28
And again,
mil?
that's going to depend on kind of where it is and when we actually collected the money. And again, because we have to base our revenues based on the prior year's revenue. So it may not have a major impact. We may be able to play with it a little bit, but I
Okay.
don't see a major impact on that.
Okay.
I would just say that it would be nice to be able to track it somehow, so that if there is this extra $200,000, we can sort of see that, and even if it's not going to be until 2019, that we can use it for some sort of tax relief or
Where you'll see it is the interest and cost. You see this line item up here, interest and cost on taxes. So we have that in the budget. It may just go. It may be more money in that line item. Or it may actually show up and not there, but it's another line item for not interest and costs on taxes. Investments. I'm sorry. The next item is an item where we haven't seen growth in a number of years, and that's our state aid. It's been flat. We expect that to continue to be flat. The other thing you'll see is the Uniform Construction Code for the new members. Those are our building code fees. They actually are in a dedicated reserve. These are the fees that we receive from the construction code fees for the overhead costs. And we get a small bump each year based on just kind of inflationary. The next thing you'll see is there's a reduction in the shared services. There's, of course, we have changed our shared services from us actually providing it to the school providing it. So that's why this goes away. There's a corresponding reduction also in our expenditures because that went away. But we're actually still doing it with the Board of Ed. You just don't see it reflected here. The grants, as I said, at this point aren't that important for us because they will change and they are neutral. Here's really the area where we really want to concentrate, where we're really seeing most of our issues, and that's in special items of revenue. One item that I'll first focus on is the capital reserve. We used $600,000 this year, and we're projecting $600,000. This is the area that I talked about before where we may be able to provide additional funding to offset the costs for the increase in debt service. So there may be additional bump that we can put here that will help offset those costs. In addition to that, you'll see a number of line items are going down. You have the reserve for premiums on bonds and notes. And again, that's just based on the premiums we receive when we sell bonds and notes. And that fluctuates. This is one of the, I'll call it kind of a soft revenue that we've been putting in the budget that we really need to be careful about putting in the budget because we can't regenerate it on a regular basis. We just don't know how much we're going to receive. As you can see, that went down down to $217,000. The big hit is in our reserve for debt service. That's the item that I talked about before, where it was $1.4 million for a number of years. We went down $750,000 to try to cushion the loss of that last year. This year, it's completely going away. So we're receiving off the top $750,000 hit in our revenues just based on that. The $85,000 in reserve for debt service, there's a corresponding expenditures, so that doesn't have any impact. That's going away, but the expenditure is also going away. And the assessment trust is down $100,000. That's, again, one of those kind of soft revenues that we really need to move away from in terms of projecting those in our budget. So as you can see here, one of the main things that you can see here, take away from this budget is on the expenditure side, as you can see, we've made a lot of progress in terms of really working through our expenditures, keeping our expenditures down. Quite frankly, if we hadn't done those things, we would really be getting hit hard just based on what you're seeing here in terms of our revenue loss this year. One of the things that we may want to think about this year is, again, trying to cushion this and looking at surplus to help us kind of navigate our way down off of these kind of hits to get to a point. So that's another discussion that we'll have at another point is, do we increase the use of some surplus to kind of help us navigate through this period of time. But once we're through this, I think we'll be in really good shape in terms of we'll have a steady revenue base, and as we'll continue to work in terms of really decreasing on our expenditure side. We've been doing that, so hopefully all the work that we've kind of put together and making some of the decisions that you've made will put us in really good shape.
Where does the parking money appear on this?
The parking money, actually, this is just the current fund. The parking money goes into the parking fund. There's also a line item, let me find out where it is. It says utility. Yep, utility operating surplus. That's the additional part where that comes in. But most of that money goes into the utility for the parking utility. And again, that's an area where there may be an increase in terms of using the utility surpluses in this budget. And again, the one thing I'd only caution is we want to make sure that it's something that we can regenerate on a regular basis. This is where we are at this point. Again, this is an initial budget. There is a lot of room for working through a lot of these issues. lot of things that we need to talk about, and we'll work through these at the next two budget sessions to get us to the point where we're ready to introduce the budget to the citizens. Questions?
Well, I think I just want to put a pin in that we're going to have many opportunities, and we don't have a budget committee now, but we can also meet individually with you if we have
Absolutely.
questions.
Right, okay, yep, sorry, okay.
Mayor?
And, sorry, got a second win there. Adrian, did you want to say anything on behalf of CFAC? You're just, okay. Okay, all right. We do have the budget calendar that, we have a resolution for that.
I'll move it.
Okay, it's been moved by Ms. Krummeller
Second.
and seconded by Mr. Quinn. Is there any discussion on the budget calendar? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, all right. And so we'll have our next discussion about the budget on the what did we say, the 26th? February 26th. No, February 21st, for those who want to attend.
We'll have our first discussion in the first meeting in February.
The 12th, the 12th.
Budget work session. We will then have on the 21st an additional work session.
Got it. Okay, great.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Very good, very nice.
And the budget, are we going to have it in the room where we could be around a table?
Yes,
Yeah,
in
that's
the
good,
community
okay.
room. Well, February 12th will be the regular council meeting here. The 21st will be in the community room. In the community room. The 21st. That's the Wednesday morning meeting, and it's really for the finance committee folks, but it's open to everybody who wants to come.
Oh,
and
wait,
it's an
is that
open meeting.
February 21st?
February 21st. And then there's, it'll be more discussion after that, I'm sure. Okay, now we're on to our ordinance introductions. The first one is ordinance by the municipality of Princeton increasing the number of members of on the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee and amending Section 2111 of the Code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968, and Section 284 of the Code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1974. And this was, we had quite a few great applicants for CFAC. It's a relatively small committee, so it's just increasing it by one. So is there a motion to introduce?
I'll move it.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Cohen, seconded by Mr. Quinn. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman? Yes. Ms. Crum-Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Fraga?
Yes.
The ordinance is introduced and the public hearing will be on February 12th, 2018. Next is 2018-2, an ordinance in the municipality of Princeton authorizing to vacate an existing sanitary sewer easement on block 31.04, lot 21, 260 Hawthorne Avenue, Princeton Municipal Tax Map. Is there a motion to introduce?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Liverman,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Cohen. Any discussion on this? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Crum-Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Fraga?
Yes.
And the ordinance has been introduced, and the public hearing will be on February 12th, 2018. We've already passed the first resolution, so we'll move on to 1848, which is a resolution authorizing contract with New Venture Benefits Group to provide health insurance brokerage services for 2018 in an amount not to exceed $15,000. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
It's moved by Mr. Quinn, seconded by Ms. Krummeller. Mr. DeShield, did you want to say anything about the health insurance brokerage service?
Yes.
And given we're saving so much money on health insurance,
Do we need it?
right?
Well, we could save even more.
Actually, you still, and again, we still need, I think we still should continue to look, it's my opinion, you need to be aggressive every year. Sometimes it doesn't work for you, sometimes it does.
Okay.
And you need the brokerage services either way to provide additional assistance in negotiating your rates on an annual basis.
Got it.
Because the brokerage service is really just for our dental program. If we ever move out of the state health benefits plan, that's when we'll be paying it for our medical. So what they'll do is they're just providing the brokerage service for the dental program. In addition, they'll do an analysis to determine whether we could move out. If we do, what they get is to be able to renegotiate the brokerage services for those services still.
Got it.
So it's good to still continue to do the brokerage services.
Okay.
In addition to that, they'll be working with us for wellness programs and other other initiatives.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 1849, resolution approving transfers in accordance with NJSA 40A 4-59 in the amount of $100,000. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Krummeller. Is there a
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Cohen. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next, I would just recommend we move these next 4 in block unless there's anybody would like to discuss. Do we want to discuss the last one with Alexander Road? Yeah.
One thing I'm just wondering about the housing purchase. I guess.
Okay, let's just go through them one by one. It's
Okay,
probably easier.
okay.
18-50, resolution authorizing a shared service agreement with the Princeton School District and the Princeton Public Library for a network technical support specialist through June 30th, 2018, followed by a 12-month employment contract agreed upon by all entities in the amount of $26,332. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Mr. Liverman, seconded by Ms. Krummeller. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes. Next is 1851, resolution authorizing the submittal of a grant application to the Community Stewardship Incentive Program, Reforestation and Tree Planting Grant through the Department of Environmental Protection, New Jersey Forest Service Urban and Community Forestry Program in the amount of $30,000. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Krummeller, seconded by Ms. Howard. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes. Next is 1852, resolution authorizing the purchase of affordable housing unit 213 Brickhouse Road in the amount of $94,792. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Krummeller and seconded by Mr. Cohen. And Ms.
Never
Krummeller, you had a
mind.
question? Okay.
Sorry, I don't have the question
Any
anymore.
other discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes. And next is 1853, resolution establishing the design cross-section for Alexander Street from approximately Lawrence Drive south to the Princeton municipal boundary. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Krummeller, and is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Cohen. And for this one, I just want to pause for a second and just let everybody know what this is for, putting in a new bridge on Alexander Street and the cross-section of that. So the width of the lanes and the width of the shoulders and the side path. So it's a major project, major widening now that we've completed 206, ready to close down another major road. Make sure we don't fall in the water.
I'll,
Do we
I'll
know
just,
when? Do we know when the time frame is? I think I might have been told and forgot.
They're shooting for 2019 construction.
Okay, and then also it's going to hopefully be both bridges because the state also, I think, engineering's working with them also to try to move their projects so we can do both at the same time, which makes sense.
and I just want to mention that I appreciate that Ms. Stockton put together a really inclusive process. Several of us had really substantive conversations with her and with the engineers from the county and considered options, and I think we came to the right solution.
Excellent.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And I also appreciate Mayor Lempert suggesting that approach.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Glad. Hopefully this will be an easy vote. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, resolution passes unanimously. And next we come to the consent agenda, which contains items of a routine nature passed by single vote. Are there any items anybody would like removed from the consent agenda?
I would like to just pull out item number 8. Which,
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is the resolution to join Cities for Citizen Networks. Why don't we take that one first, which is 1861, resolution to join the Cities for Citizen Network to encourage and support eligible Princeton residents in their pathway to citizenship. And is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
So it's moved by Mr. Liverman and seconded by Ms. Howard. And did you have a question?
Well, I did have a question, which has been largely answered. The supporting documentation that described the program listed a number of concrete actions that a community might take in the event that they did sign on to the network. And so I had the question was, which of these specific actions, if any, are we undertaking? And Mayor Lippert passed that on to Elisa, who was here earlier tonight.
Good.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want to paraphrase the answer.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's a lot of the work sort of outlined by the pledges would be done by local nonprofits, but one of the things that Human Services does is they act as a referral agency and as a convener of groups, and so a lot of the work will be done through those partnerships with other groups, and already a lot of the work is already being undertaken. I think Princeton is actually a model community when it comes to a lot of these efforts, but it's good to be doing things in conjunction with others. I think it's a way to give more work and meaning, and also those ties to other communities, I think helps the work that we do here.
Also, I think what's important about it is that it's an opportunity for technical assistance to our staff and for having access to best practices. So we're like the little engine that could, but it's really nice to be able to see for Elisa to be networked in with, I think it's chaired by New York, LA, and Chicago, and have access to these national networks and to be able to get ideas. So it's both, a chance to highlight what we're doing, but also even a chance to up our game by being able to work with these others.
Yep, excellent.
So, Heather, maybe you know this. Who provides the citizenship classes for new citizens? I mean, can we?
The library.
Oh, the library does right now?
Library, and I think that the Y might do some also. And then I was mentioning in my reports, I don't know if everybody was glued to listening to all of them, but the library just got a big grant too that they can possibly use for some of this too, for the English language learners. All right, so all in favor of 1861?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes. And is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Liverman and seconded by Ms. Krummeller. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Quinn and seconded by Mr. Liverman. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.